Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the fascinating evolution of royal Christmases, from the lavish feasts of Caesars to the cozy traditions of kings. What you're about to discover might just surprise you. These ancient celebrations weren't always filled with cheer. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the hustle and bustle of ancient Rome, where emperors were rock stars, and the streets were a cacophony of trade and triumph, there existed a winter festival so rollicking that it made modern New Year's Eve look like a quiet tea party. Enter Saturnalia, the Roman Empire's answer to a week-long holiday rave, complete with feasting, feuding, and enough gift-giving to make Santa's sleigh seem positively minimalist. Contrary to what you might think, Saturnalia wasn't just an excuse for the Romans to dodge work and party. It was a deeply ingrained cultural festivity that celebrated Saturn, the god of agriculture, and marked the end of the sowing season. This wasn't your typical day off. It was a full-on extravaganza, stretching from December 17th to the 23rd. 7 days of sheer revelry, where the social order was turned on its head faster than a chariot race. Now, let's talk about the role reversals, because this is where things get juicy. During Saturnalia, slaves and masters would swap places. Yes, you heard that right. Masters served meals to their slaves, at least symbolically. This topsy-turvy tradition added a dash of chaos to an already wild week. It was a time for everyone to let loose, albeit under the watchful eyes of the guards and their human representatives, the emperors. Speaking of emperors, let's not gloss over the antics of one particularly infamous ruler, Caligula. If there were a Roman equivalent of the phrase, "hold my wine," Caligula would embody it. Known for his eccentricities, a mild term, I assure you, Caligula's Saturnalia celebrations were grandiose and, shall we say, financially questionable. He would distribute lavish gifts to his courtiers and guests, emptying the imperial coffers faster than you could shout, "Io Saturnalia." Economic impact of such generosity. Let's just say Rome's treasury sometimes felt the hangover long after the party was over. But Saturnalia wasn't just about indulgence and inversion. It laid down the roots that would eventually blossom into the Christmas traditions we know today. Gift-giving, for one, was a key component of the festivities. Romans exchanged small presents, often wax candles or little clay figurines called sigillaria, as tokens of goodwill. This practice echoes through the ages, morphing into the holiday presents we wrap in shiny paper today. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle this one. Saturnalia was not the ancient version of Christmas. Sure, it influenced some aspects, but it was very much its own beast. The festival was a cocktail of merriment and mayhem, with a side of ritual sacrifice for flavor. It was a time to honor Saturn, and metaphorically speaking, let one's hair down. Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. Economically, Saturnalia was both a boon and a bane. On one hand, it stimulated trade and commerce, as people rushed to buy gifts and delicacies. On the other, it strained the resources of those already living on the edge of poverty. The financial burden of keeping up with Saturnalian expectations was enough to drive even the most frugal Roman to the brink of a toga-twisting crisis. Politically, the festival served as a pressure valve for societal tensions. By allowing the lower classes a temporary taste of power and luxury, Saturnalia acted as a reminder that the rigid hierarchies of Roman life could be bent, if not broken, for a few days each year. It was a dance with chaos, but one that had its own set of unwritten rules and boundaries. As we wrap up our Roman holiday tale, let's not forget the primary sources that give us a glimpse into this ancient festival. Historical heavyweights like Seneca, the Younger, and Macrobius penned vivid descriptions of Saturnalia's festivities. Seneca, ever the Stoic, once remarked on the excesses with a characteristic mix of admiration and disapproval, capturing the essence of a festival that was as much about letting go as it was about holding on to tradition. So, as we move forward through this series, remember this: Saturnalia was more than just a party. It was a mirror reflecting the hopes, contradictions, and complexities of Roman society. A festival that, in its own chaotic way, set the stage for the Yuletide celebrations that would follow centuries later. And if nothing else, it's a reminder that even the ancients knew how to throw a holiday bash that could rival anything we can muster today. As the echoes of Saturnalia fade into the annals of history, let's catapult ourselves into the medieval era, where Christmas was less about cozy fireside gatherings and more about flaunting power with a side of gluttony. Picture this: a king's court, less a scene from a Hallmark card and more a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, but with twice the political intrigue. First off, let's talk about King John of England. You know, the infamous ruler who made such a splash that even Disney couldn't resist turning him into an animated lion with a penchant for thumb-sucking. In reality, John was a master of the medieval Christmas spectacle. His court was a veritable smorgasbord of excess. Think the 12 days of Christmas, but with more lords a-leaping and less partridge-in-a-pear-tree quaintness. In 1230, King John threw a Christmas party at the cost of £200 of silver, an amount that could buy you an entire village or two back then. The feast was a culinary tour de force featuring 400 oxen, 1,000 sheep, 15,000 herrings, and enough wine to float a small armada. You'd think it was a celebration of peace and goodwill, but don't be fooled by the festive facade. These banquets were political theatre at its finest, designed to showcase the king's wealth and power, keeping his barons in awe and allegiance. If you were a medieval ruler and wanted to avoid being usurped, feeding your nobles into a stupor was a surprisingly effective strategy. And then there was Charlemagne, the Frankish king crowned emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day in the year 800. Talk about using the holiday to make a statement. His coronation was less about the birth of Christ and more about the rebirth of the Roman Empire under his rule. Charlemagne's court was the epicenter of Christmas celebrations that combined religious solemnity with displays of imperial grandeur. He didn't just celebrate Christmas, he weaponized it, using the occasion to cement his legitimacy and remind everyone within earshot, or sword's reach, of the divine right of kings. Now, let's not romanticize these gatherings too much. While medieval Christmases have been sold to us as a time of knights and chivalry, the reality was more about power plays than wassailing and goodwill. Take the myth of the gallant knight, for instance. Sure, tournaments were held, and knights donned their shiniest armor, but the true joust was for political favor. These events were a medieval linked-in, where connections were forged over goblets of mead and alliances were sealed with a handshake and a slice of boar's head. Speaking of boar's head, medieval feasts were a culinary spectacle, but they were also a reflection of the social hierarchy. The closer you sat to the monarch, the better your chances of nibbling on the choicest morsels. Picture a dining table that was less about democratic dining and more about a pecking order, where the scraps and lesser cuts were reserved for those further from the king's favor. And if you think this was just about eating, think again. Food was currency, a tangible measure of a ruler's wealth, and by extension, power. In a world where famine was never far from the door, a table groaning under the weight of food was as much a show of might as a castle's battlements. Economically, these celebrations were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they provided employment and stimulated local economies, as merchants, cooks, and entertainers were called upon to supply the festivities. On the other, the financial strain on the royal coffers was immense. The crown's treasury often felt the pinch, leading to increased taxes, or worse, borrowing from those very barons who might be eyeing your throne with envy. It's a testament to the medieval balancing act of keeping your nobles fed and your enemies at bay, all while trying not to plunge your realm into financial ruin. Politically, Christmas was the perfect cover for negotiations, alliances, and sometimes betrayals. A well-timed gift or pointed absence could speak volumes. Imagine being at a Christmas gathering and realizing that your gift was a subtle declaration of war. The medieval mindset often saw Christmas less as a time for peace on earth and more as an opportunity to settle scores or forge new contracts. If anyone tells you Christmas was a time of simple merriment back then, remind them that beneath the holly and ivy lay the sharp thorns of political maneuvering. In unraveling the myth of the medieval Christmas, we find a tale not just of celebration, but of strategy. These were not quaint gatherings. They were battlegrounds of influence, where the stakes were kingdoms and the prize was survival. So as we leave the medieval court, remember that even in the glow of candlelit feasting halls, the shadows of ambition and power were never far from the flickering flame. And with that, we'll save the next chapter for another time. We've got more historical holiday cheer to unwrap, but for now, let's leave the medieval kings to their feasting and plodding, with the promise that our journey through the annals of royal Christmases is far from over. Stay tuned for the next slice of history, where we'll dive deeper into the machinations and merriments of yore. As we leave the dimly lit halls of medieval power plays, let's take a brisk stroll down the cobblestone streets of Renaissance Florence, where Christmas was less about the political chessboard and more a canvas for artistic grandeur. Enter the Medici family, the ultimate patrons of both art and holiday splendor. If ever there were a dynasty that could make Christmas feel like a high-stakes art auction, it was the Medicis. Picture the Medici Christmases not as cozy gatherings, but as a lavish showcase of their wealth and cultural dominance. We're talking about a family who could commission a Botticelli like you might order a latte, customized, expensive, and flaunted with an air of casual superiority. Lorenzo de Medici, known as Il Magnifico, wasn't just a political powerhouse. He was the Renaissance version of a social media influencer. His Christmas celebrations were more than just feasts. They were multi-sensory exhibitions of opulence. Take, for example, the Medici's penchant for commissioning Christmas pageants. These were no amateur affairs with makeshift costumes and off-key carols. Oh no, these were full-scale productions featuring elaborate sets, costumes that would make a fashionista weep with envy, and music composed by the era's finest talents. It was a case of Renaissance FOMO before FOMO was even a thing. Missing a Medici Christmas could mean missing out on cultural immortality, or at least a decent networking opportunity. Economically, these festivities were a windfall for local artisans and merchants, who found themselves busy crafting everything from intricate jewelry to grandiose tapestries. The Medicis spending was so lavish, it could have jump-started an economy or two. But while the family's largesse kept the Florentine economy buzzing, it also served as a reminder of their dominating influence. When you control the purse strings, you control the narrative, and the Medicis were master storytellers in this regard. Politically, Christmas was as much a stage for the Medicis as it was for their seasonal revelries. By inviting influential figures from across Europe to their celebrations, they cemented alliances and subtly reminded everyone of their reach. It was diplomacy wrapped in tinsel, with Lorenzo playing the role of both gracious host and shrewd negotiator. Forget political pamphlets. A seat at a Medici Christmas table was the ultimate campaign leaflet. But let's not get swept away by the romance of it all. The Medicis weren't just benevolent patrons of the arts. They were shrewd power players who used culture as a tool for control. Their Christmases were as much about maintaining their grip on Florence as they were about spreading holiday cheer. In a city where art was both a currency and a weapon, the Medicis wielded it with the precision of a scalpel and the impact of a broadsword. And while we're busy myth-busting, let's tackle the idea that the Renaissance was all about enlightenment and beauty. Sure, it birthed some of the most iconic works of art and thought, but it was also a time of intense competition and cutthroat tactics. The Medicis knew that a well-placed sculpture or commissioned painting could sway public opinion faster than any decree. They understood that the real power lay not just in military might, but in cultural influence, and they leveraged Christmas to its fullest potential. Now, let's talk about the spectacle of Renaissance Christmases and how they trickled down to influence modern celebrations. The era's love for theatricality and pageantry laid the groundwork for today's grand holiday displays. The idea of using light and color to create a festive atmosphere, a Renaissance innovation. The concept of a Christmas market bustling with artisans and vendors. You can thank the enterprising spirit of the time for that too. So as we wrap up this section of our historical holiday tour, remember this. The Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth of classical ideas. It was a reinvention of Christmas as a platform for cultural and political expression. The Medicis turned the holiday into a spectacle that highlighted their power and prestige, influencing how we celebrate today. From the glittering lights of Rockefeller Center to the elaborate window displays of Paris, the echoes of Renaissance Florence resonate louder than a choir of angels. And with that, we leave the Medicis to their gilded festivities, the promise that our journey through historical Christmases has more chapters to unfold. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the past, where the Yuletide spirit continues to weave its complex tapestry of tradition, celebration, and power. And now, let's waltz into the Tudor and Stuart era, where Christmas was less about silent nights and more about soap opera-level drama and religious roller coasters. Enter Henry Roman VIII, the quintessential Tudor king, who threw Christmas parties so lavish they might have made the Medicis blush. You'd think Henry, with his 6 wives and penchant for chopping heads, had enough on his plate. But when it came to Yuletide festivities, he went all out, sparing no expense to showcase his royal clout. Let's start with some numbers. Take Christmas 1517, for example. Henry's court indulged in a feast that could have fed an army, and probably did, considering the size of his retinue. The affair featured 14,000 dishes. Yes, that's right, 14,000. It was a spread so grand that the Food Network would need a whole series just to cover it. Roasted swan, peacock pies, and a staggering array of meats you didn't know could be stuffed into pies. This wasn't just about filling stomachs. It was a culinary power play, a way for Henry to remind his courtiers and foreign dignitaries of England's newfound wealth and his own prodigious appetite, both for food and for making political statements. Now, if you thought this was just about food, think again. These banquets were the Tudor version of Instagram, meant to project an image of invincible strength and opulence. Every dish was a message, every toast a declaration. The court was a theatre, and Henry, the ultimate showman, orchestrated every detail. But behind the scenes, all was not well. While the king feasted, England was on the brink of religious upheaval. Henry's break from the Catholic Church wasn't just a sudden whim, but a seismic shift that would ripple through Christmas celebrations, transforming them into battlegrounds of faith. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's pause to admire the sheer audacity of Henry's Christmases. These weren't just dinners. They were spectacles, with masks, jousts, and elaborate entertainments that went on for days. Imagine trying to top that at your next office holiday party. The king's court became a stage where the grandest costumes were donned, and allegories were played out in full regalia. It was less about the nativity and more about the narrative Henry wanted to craft, a monarch whose reign was as expansive as his waistline. As for the ladies, Henry's wives certainly knew how to make an entrance. Catherine of Aragon, for instance, was no stranger to the Christmas pageantry of the Tudor court, playing her role with grace, until she was unceremoniously cast aside. Her fate was a stark reminder that not all of Henry's Christmases were merry. This was a court where marital drama was as much a part of the festivities as the wassail. And let's not forget Anne Boleyn, whose rise and fall were both celebrated and mourned with equal fervor, adding a darker tone to the holiday cheer. Economically, these celebrations were both a blessing and a curse. They stimulated the local economy as merchants and artisans scrambled to meet the king's demands. But the financial burden was immense. The cost of such extravagance often led to increased taxes, leaving commoners less than jolly. The crown's treasury felt the strain, and Henry's penchant for spending without restraint mirrored the financial recklessness that characterized parts of his reign. Yet, it wasn't all feasting and merriment in Tudor England. Fast forward a few decades, and you'll find Oliver Cromwell, the ultimate party pooper, who decided that Christmas was a bit too much fun for his Puritan tastes. In 1647, Parliament, under Cromwell's influence, banned Christmas. Yes, you heard that right. The man effectively tried to cancel Christmas. Talk about someone who would have been a hit on the Grinch's guest list. Cromwell and his fellow Puritans saw Christmas as a sinful indulgence, a Catholic relic that needed to be purged from English life. For them, the holiday had become a hotbed of vice, more about revelry than reverence. So out went the feasts, the games, and the festive cheer, replaced by somber reflections and fasting. The ban, however, was about as popular as a coal-filled stocking. It sparked riots and protests as people clung to their traditions with a tenacity that would make even the most hardened Puritan reconsider. But why such drastic measures? The Puritans weren't just a bunch of killjoys. They represented a broader movement toward reform, one that sought to purify the church and society. Their attempt to erase Christmas reflected a deeper struggle between tradition and modernity, faith and reason. And while the ban was eventually lifted with the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, it left an indelible mark on the holiday, reshaping it in ways that would reverberate through the centuries. The tug-of-war between celebration and sobriety, between religious fervor and secular enjoyment, set the stage for future Christmases. It was a battle that played out not just in England, but across Europe, as societies grappled with the meaning of the holiday. As we delve deeper into the annals of history, we'll see how these conflicts echoed through time, influencing the way we celebrate today, even as they remind us that the past was never as quaint as it seems. So, as we leave the Tudors and Stuarts to their respective festivities, or lack thereof, remember this: Christmas has always been more than just a holiday. It's a reflection of the times, a canvas on which the stories of power, faith, and human folly are painted. And while our journey through history is far from over, one thing is certain: the spirit of Christmas, with all its contradictions and complexities, continues to captivate us, reminding us of the enduring dance between tradition and change. As the dust settled from Cromwell's rather drab attempt to cancel Christmas, we find ourselves careening into the Victorian era, a time when Christmas got a makeover that would make even the most seasoned influencer jealous. And to Queen Victoria and her beloved Prince Albert, the royal duo who turned the holiday into the cozy, family-centric affair we recognize today. They didn't just embrace Christmas, they practically adopted it, giving it a fresh coat of Victorian charm and turning it into a national spectacle. Let's start with the Christmas tree, a tradition as ubiquitous now as fruitcake and awkward family gatherings. But back in the 1840, it was practically a novelty. While the concept of decorating trees wasn't entirely new, thanks to German immigrants in the United States, it was Albert who deserves credit for plopping a fir tree into the middle of Windsor Castle and decking it out like the Rockefeller Center of its time. His German roots shone through as he introduced this Teutonic tradition to the British Isles, and soon it wasn't just the royal family basking in its evergreen's glow. By 1848, an illustration of the royal family around their tree had graced the pages of the Illustrated London News, and suddenly every Victorian household wanted in on the action. Talk about an influencer move before Instagram even existed. But that's not where the Victorian Christmas magic stopped. Enter the Christmas card, the brainchild of Sir Henry Cole in 1843. Cole, a civil servant with an eye for innovation, or perhaps just tired of writing lengthy holiday letters, commissioned an artist to design a card he could send to his friends and acquaintances. The result: a charming scene of a family gathered around a table, toasting the season with a message of goodwill. These cards were sold for $1 each, which might sound like a steal today, but was a small investment back then. The idea caught fire faster than a Yule log, and soon the Christmas card became a staple of holiday tradition, a way to connect with loved ones near and far without the hassle of penning a novel. Economically, the Victorians were riding a wave of prosperity, and Christmas became a perfect outlet for their newfound affluence. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and with it came an increase in mass production and a burgeoning middle class, eager to partake in the festive cheer. Department stores began to appear, transforming Christmas shopping into a national pastime and setting the stage for the retail bonanza we know today. The holiday became a commercial juggernaut, with merchants and manufacturers cashing in on the desire for gifts, decorations, and all things merry and bright. But let's not sugarcoat it too much. While the image of a Victorian Christmas is wrapped in nostalgia, it wasn't all Dickensian delight. For many, the holiday highlighted the stark economic divide. While the middle and upper classes indulged in lavish feasts and exchanged opulent gifts, the working poor often struggled to make ends meet. The era's social conscience, however, did lead to greater philanthropic efforts. Dickens' A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, was both a festive tale and a social critique, a reminder of the gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's no coincidence that charitable giving saw a surge during this time, as the holiday spirit encouraged those with means to extend a helping hand, or at least a guinea or two. Politically, the Victorian Christmas also served to reinforce the image of a stable, moral society underpinned by family values. In a period marked by rapid change and industrial upheaval, the holiday offered a comforting narrative, one that emphasized hearth and home as the cornerstones of British life. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert played their parts to perfection, projecting an image of domestic bliss that resonated with their subjects. The royal Christmas became a model for the nation, a demonstration of unity and continuity amid the whirlwind of modernity. Now, let's pause to debunk a myth or two. The Victorian Christmas wasn't the quaint, snow-dusted wonder we often imagine. First, snow was about as common in December as sunshine in London, and the picture-perfect image of a white Christmas was more a product of romanticized literature than reality. Moreover, while the Victorians might not have invented the idea of Christmas as a family holiday, they certainly popularized it, their influence spreading well beyond the British Isles to shape celebrations across the globe. As we wrap up our historical journey, what can we take from the Victorian reinvention of Christmas? For starters, it's a reminder of the holiday's adaptability, its ability to absorb new traditions and morph into something that reflects the times. The Victorians taught us that Christmas could be both an intimate family affair and a public celebration, a time of reflection and revelry. They showed us that a holiday rooted in ancient rituals could be reimagined to meet the needs of a modern world, blending tradition with innovation in a way that continues to resonate. So, as we bid farewell to our historical odyssey through royal Christmases, let's keep in mind that the holiday, much like history itself, is a tapestry woven from strands of the past and present. Its traditions are a testament to human creativity and resilience, a celebration of both continuity and change. Whether you're hanging ornaments on a tree, penning a holiday card, or indulging in a festive feast, remember that these customs carry echoes of emperors, kings, and queens, each leaving their mark on the season we cherish today. In the end, Christmas is more than just a date on the calendar. It's a canvas upon which each generation paints its story. And while the trappings may change, the spirit endures, a testament to the enduring power of tradition and the timeless dance between past and present. So here's to a Christmas that nods to history while embracing the future, a celebration that, like a well-loved carol, resonates with the joy and complexity of the human experience. In the dimly lit corners of medieval Europe, where the air smelled faintly of stale bread and ambition, a group of individuals believed they were on the brink of unlocking secrets that would make Jeff Bezos look like a pauper. Welcome to the world of alchemy, where the impossible was just a formula away, and the philosopher's stone promised to be the ultimate life hack, granting immortality and turning lead into gold. Yeah, you heard me right. Turning cheap metal into bling. Sounds like the ultimate get-rich-quick scheme, right? Well, not so fast. Let's rewind to somewhere around the 8th century, when alchemy started spreading across Europe like a medieval version of a viral TikTok trend. Picture scholars and pseudoscientists hunched over their workbenches, surrounded by bubbling flasks, scribbling down recipes that read more like a witch's cookbook than a scientific manual. The heart of their obsession, the elusive philosopher's stone, a mythical substance that was basically the holy grail for anyone with a penchant for both chemistry and mysticism. It was said to be able to transform base metals like lead into gold, and as a bonus, grant the kind of immortality that would make a vampire envious. This wasn't just a hobby for the curious. It was a pursuit wrapped up in the economic anxieties of the time. Medieval economies were about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Gold meant power, and power meant influence, making the idea of creating wealth out of thin air extremely appealing. Think of it as medieval quantitative easing, but with more smoke and mirrors. Kings, nobles, and even the church had a vested interest in these experiments. After all, who wouldn't want a limitless supply of gold? But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Alchemy was as much a science as it was an art, and not everyone was convinced by its promises. The process was painstakingly slow, often involving the heating and cooling of materials in such complex sequences that you'd think they were trying to crack the code to human DNA. And spoiler alert, the philosopher's stone never materialized, unless you count the metaphorical stones they got from hauling endless amounts of lead. Despite the lack of tangible results, the allure of alchemy persisted. It was a time when science and magic shared a blurry line, and alchemists were like rock stars with a cult following. They were the original influencers, minus the Instagram filters. Their work was shrouded in secrecy, partly because they were onto something big, and partly because if anyone found out how little they actually knew, they'd be laughed out of town. Or worse, accused of witchcraft. Never a good look in those days. One of the most famous alchemists, Nicholas Flamel, became a household name, albeit posthumously, thanks to his alleged success with the Philosopher's Stone. But historians are quick to point out that his legendary status is more fiction than fact, bolstered by centuries of stories that have about as much credibility as a modern-day tabloid. Flamel's real legacy was built on the manuscripts he left behind, which were essentially a treasure map for future alchemists. Sadly, they were more cryptic than a teenager's diary, and just as likely to lead you to a dead end. So why did people keep at it? The answer is as much about human nature as it is about historical context. The promise of alchemy was a siren song, resonating with the eternal human desire to conquer death and gain wealth beyond measure. It played into the social and political dynamics of the time, offering a glimmer of hope in a world where life was often nasty, brutish, and short. To borrow a phrase from Thomas Hobbes, alchemy was a narrative that promised control over one's fate in a world that could be as unpredictable as it was unforgiving. But let's not dismiss these alchemists as mere dreamers. Their relentless pursuit of transformation, while misguided in its ultimate goal, laid some of the groundwork for modern chemistry. In their quest for gold, they developed techniques and apparatus that would later be refined and repurposed. It's like they were trying to invent the iPhone, but ended up with the wheel. Not what they set out for, but still pretty useful in the grand scheme of things. In the end, the story of medieval alchemy is a testament to the power of belief and the lengths to which humans will go in the pursuit of their dreams, no matter how improbable. It's a tale filled with intrigue, ambition, and a touch of folly. A perfect cocktail for a historical narrative that still captures our imagination today. As we delve deeper into this world, remember that every bubbling potion and cryptic manuscript was a stepping stone towards the scientific advancements we take for granted now. So, next time you look at a periodic table, spare a thought for those medieval alchemists who, against all odds, dared to dream big. Speaking of those medieval alchemists who dared to dream big, let's dive into the wild and sometimes cringe-worthy rituals that define their day-to-day. Picture this. You're an alchemist in the 14th century, surrounded by a chaotic assortment of glassware and the occasional questionable smell. Your neighbors think you're either a genius or a lunatic, sometimes both. And among your many bizarre practices, urine is your secret weapon. Yes, you heard that right. Alchemists had a curious obsession with pee, believing it was a key ingredient in their quest for gold. When life gives you lemons, I guess you make golden lemonade. The logic, or what passed for it, was that urine, like other bodily fluids, contained vital life forces. Paracelsus, the Swiss doctor and alchemist, even believed it was the quintessence, a fifth element beyond earth, water, air, and fire. Distilling urine was thought to release these mystical properties, a process that sounds as appealing as a medieval plumbing system. Ferment it, distill it, and voila, you're allegedly a step closer to the Philosopher's Stone. It was like the medieval version of a YouTube life hack, but with a far less appetizing outcome. Now, if you're questioning the scientific rigor here, you're not alone. Even in their time, alchemists were frequently mocked for their methods. A 16th century satirical poem might have dubbed them piss-pot philosophers, a term that probably didn't boost their street cred. Still, the practice underscores how alchemy was as much about faith and folklore as it was about any proto-scientific method. In a world where the lines between magic and science were as blurred as a Renaissance painting, urine added a peculiar, albeit pungent, mysticism to the mix. But wait, there's more. Enter the chemical weddings, a delightful misadventure where substances were ceremoniously married in the hopes of producing gold. Picture an awkward wedding reception where lead and mercury are the bride and groom, dressed in their finest molecular attire. These unions were steeped in symbolism, a fusion of elemental personalities that alchemists believed could conjure miraculous transformations. In reality, these chemical courtships often ended with nothing more than a puff of smoke, and the alchemist left holding a very expensive bill for a failed experiment. The allure of these chemical weddings was partly their theatrical nature. Imagine an alchemist performing before a small, captivated audience, combining elements with the flair of a magician. These performances were a cocktail of chemistry, spectacle, and a hefty dose of wishful thinking. In a world without reality TV, this was prime entertainment, mixing drama with the tantalizing promise of riches. It was less about the outcome and more about the spectacle, as if the act itself might bend the universe into granting them a golden reward. Now, why did these rituals persist, despite their dubious success rates? The answer, dear listeners, lies in the curious mix of science and mysticism that defined the age. Alchemists were the original multitaskers, blending a dash of astrology with a pinch of religious fervor. Planets and stars were believed to influence earthly events, and astrology was as integral to alchemical practice as a Bunsen burner is to modern chemistry. They consult astrological charts to determine the most auspicious times for their experiments, as if Mercury being in retrograde might actually turn their lead into gold. Religion also played a starring role in this cosmic drama. Alchemy was a spiritual journey as much as it was a scientific one. Many alchemists saw their work as a divine mission, a way to uncover the mysteries of God's creation. This fusion of faith and science, while perplexing today, made perfect sense in a medieval context. After all, when the church wielded immense power, tying your work to divine purpose was a savvy move, both politically and socially. It was a way to legitimize their work, elevating it from mere curiosity to a holy quest. The alchemists' blend of science, mysticism, and religion made them both revered and ridiculed. They were the rock stars of their time, attracting both patronage and parody. Kings and nobles might sponsor their work, hoping for a payday that would put Elon Musk's fortune to shame. But just as quickly, they could find themselves the butt of jokes, depicted in woodcuts with their heads literally in the clouds. This duality, of being seen as both sage and charlatan, was the alchemist's paradox, a testament to the complex, often contradictory nature of their practice. And yet, despite the ridicule and the endless string of failed experiments, alchemists persisted. Their work was a curious dance between the tangible and the ethereal, an attempt to grasp the infinite with finite hands. It's easy to scoff at their methods now, but let's not forget that today's science was yesterday's magic. They were exploring the boundaries of human knowledge with the tools they had, leaving behind a legacy that, while not paved in gold, certainly rich in curiosity and ambition. So, as we close this chapter on the alchemists' bizarre rituals, remember that their journey was as much about the quest as it was about the destination. In their failed experiments and art practices, they laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would eventually sweep Europe. They might not have turned lead into gold, but they certainly transformed the landscape of knowledge, a feat that's worth more than any treasure. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating world, keep in mind that every misstep and miscalculation was a stepping stone to the future we now inhabit. Ah, the alchemists, those enigmatic figures who danced on the knife's edge between genius and fool, often with a whoopee cushion of gold as their safety net. In medieval Europe, they held a peculiar status, perched somewhere between celebrity and curiosity, much like a modern-day reality TV star. Let's face it, their allure was undeniable. Who wouldn't want to hobnob with someone promising to turn your grandmother's rusty lead candlesticks into solid gold? It was the medieval equivalent of a get-rich-quick scheme, but with a lot more smoke and mirrors. But let's not kid ourselves. The road to alchemical fame was paved with precarious alliances and the whims of medieval VIPs. Think of them as the Silicon Valley investors of their day, but with more fur robes and fewer PowerPoint presentations. Kings and wealthy nobles bankrolled these esoteric endeavors, hoping for a return that would make the national treasury look like pocket change. Take King Charles VI of France, for example. In a century not particularly known for its mental stability, Charles declared himself an alchemical enthusiast, a hobby that probably seemed as sensible as his belief that he was made of glass. Yet, he funded numerous alchemical projects, convinced they would fill his coffers with gold. However, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval patronage was not for the faint-hearted. If your experiments fizzled, or your philosopher's stone turned out to be, well, just a stone, you risked falling out of favor faster than a court jester with a bad punchline. Alchemists often found themselves walking a tightrope between being hailed as saviors and being accused of fraud. The stakes were high, and failure came with consequences more severe than a sternly worded email. Think dungeons, disgrace, or worse. Setting up an alchemical lab was no weekend DIY project either. We're talking about an investment that could dwarf the annual budget of a small village. You needed glassware, rare minerals, and a dizzying array of equipment that would make a modern chemist's lab look like a minimalist's dream. It's estimated that the cost of getting an alchemist's lab up and running could easily match the GDP of a village of around 200 souls. And don't even get me started on the maintenance costs. Those furnaces didn't feed themselves. If you think your utility bills are high, try keeping a medieval furnace burning for weeks on end. Despite the monumental expenses, the belief in alchemy persisted. Why? Because the promise of alchemy was intoxicating. It was the medieval version of Silicon Valley's move fast and break things mantra, but with more lead and fewer algorithms. The potential payoff was too great to ignore, and for those with the means, investing in alchemy was a gamble worth taking. After all, the prospect of infinite wealth was as alluring then as it is now. Yet, amid the allure and the ambition lurked the spectre of charlatanry. Alchemists had to be part scientist, part magician, and part showman, were the original spin doctors, masters at crafting narratives that blended just enough truth with a heaping spoonful of fantasy. The line between alchemist and con artist was as thin as a gold leaf, and many fell on the wrong side of it. The annals of history are littered with tales of alchemists who promised the moon, but delivered little more than moonshine. Take the infamous case of Edward Kelly, a man who, despite a dubious reputation and a penchant for flamboyant hats, managed to convince the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II that he could produce gold. Spoiler alert, he couldn't. Kelly's downfall was as spectacular as his rise, and he eventually found himself imprisoned in a castle tower. It's a tale as old as time. Promise the impossible, fail to deliver, end up in a medieval timeout. But the allure of alchemy wasn't just about gold. There was a seductive mysticism to it, a tantalizing blend of science and magic that captured the imagination. In a world where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were as fluid as a bubbling potion, alchemy offered a glimpse into the divine. It was a spiritual quest as much as it was a scientific one, a journey toward understanding the mysteries of the universe. This heady mix of science, spirituality, and spectacle made alchemists the rock stars of their day, drawing patrons with promises of enlightenment as well as enrichment. Yet, the same qualities that elevated them to celebrity status also made them targets for ridicule and suspicion. Alchemical pursuits were as likely to be the subject of satire as they were to be revered, with critics questioning the validity of their work and the sanity of their patrons. And yet, despite the mockery and the failures, alchemists persisted. Their work, though often fruitless, was fueled by an unyielding belief in the possibility of transformation, a belief that would eventually help pave the way for the scientific revolution. They were dreamers who dared to peer beyond the veil of accepted knowledge, undeterred by the frequent lack of tangible results. In the end, the story of medieval alchemists is one of ambition, folly, and a relentless pursuit of the unknown. It's a tale that speaks to the timeless human desire to transcend the ordinary and touch the extraordinary. They may not have turned lead into gold, but they certainly spun their own kind of magic, transforming the landscape of knowledge in ways that would echo through the ages. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating world, let's remember that their legacy is not measured in gold, but in the spirit of curiosity and the courage to dream beyond the confines of them. And so, the tale of alchemy continues, but now with a twist that even Night Shyamalan would envy. As we step into the 16th and 17th centuries, alchemy starts to shrug off its mystical shroud to reveal the serious science underneath. It's like pulling back the curtain on a magic show and realizing the magician has been a physicist all along. So, let's dive into this transformative era where alchemy began to evolve into what we now recognize as chemistry. First on the docket is Paracelsus, a Swiss physician with a name that sounds like he should be wielding a sword in an epic fantasy. But instead, he wielded something far more potent, the power of chemical medicine. Born in 1493, Paracelsus was a bit of a rebel with a cause. He threw out the traditional medical playbook, quite literally. He burned the works of Galen and Avicenna during a lecture, and declared that medicine should be based on chemistry, not astrology or ancient texts. Revolutionary, right. You could say he was the punk rocker of early modern medicine, smashing the status quo with the vigor of a medieval Sid Vicious. Paracelsus believed that illnesses were caused by chemical imbalances in the body and could be treated with chemical remedies. Radical stuff for a time when leeches and bloodletting were the healthcare system's MVPs. He introduced the use of minerals and chemicals in medicine, including compounds like mercury and arsenic, which, while not ideal in a modern pharmaceutical context, were a vast improvement over the medieval equivalent of snake oil. His work laid the groundwork for iatrochemistry, a precursor to pharmacology, and began to shift alchemy's reputation from a mystical practice to a legitimate scientific discipline. While Paracelsus was busy playing the role of medical maverick, another figure was quietly setting the stage for chemistry's grand debut, Robert Boyle. Born in 1627, Boyle was a man who'd make any science teacher proud. He's best known for Boyle's law, which describes the relationship between the pressure and volume of a gas. But beyond that, he was a staunch advocate for empirical research and the scientific method, effectively telling alchemists everywhere to put their money where their mouth was, or more accurately, to back up their claims with reproducible experiments. Boyle's book, The Skeptical Chimist, published in 1661, is often hailed as a foundational text in modern chemistry. In it, he argued against the classical elements, earth, air, fire, and water, as the building blocks of matter, instead suggesting that matter was composed of various combinations of different corpuscles, what we might call atoms today. His insistence on systematic experimentation and his challenge to traditional alchemical elements were pivotal in transitioning alchemy into the domain of rigorous scientific inquiry. Now, let's not kid ourselves. The transition from alchemy to chemistry was about as smooth as a medieval carriage ride on a cobblestone street. It was a time of intellectual upheaval, with old ideas clashing with the new. But this tumultuous period was ripe with innovation. Alchemists-turned chemists made significant contributions to areas like distillation, fermentation, and metallurgy, skills that would lay the groundwork for everything from the Industrial Revolution to your favorite craft brewery. Take distillation, for instance. Alchemists perfected this technique, which involves heating a liquid to create vapor and then cooling it to create a liquid again. This process was crucial not just for producing spirits that could put hair on your chest, but also for the creation of medicines and perfumes. It was a craft that required precision and patience, much like brewing the perfect cup of artisanal coffee today, minus the hipster barista. Metallurgy, the science of extracting and shaping metals, also owes much to alchemical practices. Alchemists developed methods for purifying metals and creating alloys, driven by their insatiable quest to turn base metals into gold, while their dreams of golden glory were, let's say, overly ambitious. Their techniques contributed significantly to the development of metalworking, crucial for everything from weaponry to architecture. Think of it as the medieval version of recycling, turning something old into something new, even if it wasn't quite the gold they were hoping for. As the 17th century rolled on, alchemy's reputation continued to evolve. While the idea of the philosopher's stone might have been relegated to the realm of fantasy, the practical applications of alchemical research were undeniable. Alchemy became a bridge between the mystical and the empirical, with its practitioners laying the groundwork for the scientific method and experimental rigor that would define the Enlightenment and beyond. In essence, alchemy's transformation into chemistry was like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, albeit a butterfly with a penchant for Bunsen burners and beakers. This metamorphosis was fueled by visionary thinkers who dared to question conventional wisdom and embrace experimentation. They were the real-life Tony Starks of their day, blending genius with a touch of madness to forge a new path forward. Of course, myths about alchemy being nothing more than a fool's errand persist, but to dismiss it entirely is to overlook the genuine contributions it made to science. Alchemy may not have delivered on its promise of eternal life or limitless wealth, but it did spur the kind of innovation and curiosity that would eventually lead to the scientific breakthroughs we enjoy today. So, as we stand on the shoulders of these early giants, it's worth remembering that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry of ideas, both brilliant and absurd, that weave together to form the rich tapestry of human progress. Alchemy's legacy may not be measured in gold, but its impact on the scientific landscape is priceless. And with that, we leave you on the cusp of the next chapter in this fascinating journey, a chapter where alchemy's mystical allure gives way to the rational clarity of chemistry. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this intriguing narrative, where dreams of gold turn into the tangible achievements of modern science. And so, as alchemy sheds its mystical cloak to reveal the dazzling world of chemistry, let's pause to reflect on its lasting impact, not just in the realm of science, but in the cultural tapestry that envelops our everyday lives. Alchemy, with its blend of science and sorcery, has left an indelible mark on our collective imagination, a legacy that continues to shimmer like a mirage on the horizon of human curiosity. First off, let's talk pop culture. Alchemy has proven to be catnip for storytellers. From J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, where the Philosopher's Stone is a literal plot device, to Hiromu Arakawa's Full Metal Alchemist, an anime that spins alchemy into a complex tale of ethics and adventure. These stories capture the essence of alchemy's allure, the tantalizing possibility of bending the rules of nature, of turning dreams into reality with a flick of the wrist and a sprinkle of stardust. It's as if the alchemists of yore passed their torches to modern-day creators, who have run with it straight into the pages of fantasy and science fiction. But why does alchemy continue to grip our imaginations with the tenacity of a medieval king clutching his crown? It's simple. Alchemy is the ultimate metaphor for transformation, of self, of matter, of the universe. It's a narrative that whispers of hidden potential and the magic of metamorphosis, offering a glimmer of hope that, perhaps, the impossible isn't quite so out of reach. In a world where reality often feels as rigid as a lead pipe, alchemy offers the promise of golden possibilities. Now, before we get too misty-eyed about the romance of it all, let's dive back into the nitty-gritty. Historically speaking, the real legacy of alchemy is less about turning lead into gold and more about how it laid the groundwork for scientific progress. The alchemists' relentless quest for knowledge, their experimental methods, and their willingness to challenge established norms were pivotal in the development of modern science. Alchemy's transition to chemistry was a turning point, marking a shift from mysticism to empiricism that would drive the scientific revolution. In economic terms, alchemy was a bit of a financial roller coaster. As we've seen, setting up an alchemist's lab could cost as much as the GDP of a small village, and patrons often found themselves investing in little more than smoke and mirrors. Yet, this pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone was more than just a quest for wealth. It was a search for understanding, a desire to unravel the mysteries of the universe. And while the alchemists may not have succeeded in filling their coffers with gold, they did enrich the intellectual landscape in ways that continue to pay dividends. Politically, alchemy was a double-edged sword. For rulers like King Charles VI, it was a potential ticket to untold riches and power, a way to bolster their reign with the promise of infinite wealth. But it was also a risky gamble, with the potential to backfire spectacularly if the promised results failed to materialize. The relationship between alchemists and their patrons was as delicate as a glass alembic, requiring careful balancing of expectations and results. So, what broader lessons can we glean from the alchemist's tale? For starters, it's a testament to the enduring human spirit of exploration and innovation. Alchemy reminds us that progress often comes from the willingness to dream big, to venture into the unknown with nothing more than faith and a handful of formulas. It's a story that speaks to the power of imagination, the courage to challenge the status quo, and the resilience to keep pushing forward even when success seems as elusive as the Philosopher's Stone itself. And let's not forget the alchemist's knack for spinning a good yarn. Their blend of science and storytelling, of fact and fantasy, is what keeps us coming back for more. It's a reminder that history is not a dusty tome, but a living, breathing narrative filled with characters as colorful as any found in fiction. The alchemists may not have achieved immortality in the literal sense, but their stories have endured, capturing our imaginations and inspiring generations of dreamers to follow in their footsteps. As we wrap up this journey through the world of medieval alchemy, let's take a moment to appreciate the quirky, the curious, and the downright bizarre aspects of this fascinating field. Whether it's the image of an alchemist distilling urine in the hopes of creating gold, or the idea of chemical weddings uniting elements in a cosmic dance. Alchemy offers a treasure trove of stories that are as entertaining as they are enlightening. In conclusion, the legacy of alchemy is one of transformation, not just of base metals into gold, but of ideas into reality, of dreams into discoveries. It's a tale that reminds us of the power of curiosity and the boundless potential of the human mind. So, the next time you pick up a piece of pop culture that features alchemy, or find yourself pondering the mysteries of the universe, remember the alchemists who dared to dream beyond the possible. In their quest for the unattainable, they laid the groundwork for the world we know today. A world where the impossible is just another frontier waiting to be explored. Cheers to that, and may our own quests for knowledge be as bold and adventurous as those of the alchemists who came before us. In the rolling hills of Mvizo, a small village in the eastern Cape of South Africa, an extraordinary life began on July 18, 1918. Among the chattering of chickens and the bleating of goats, a boy named Raleigh Mandela entered the world. Now, Raleigh in the Xhosa language is a name that translates to pulling the branch of a tree, or more colloquially, troublemaker. Quite the prophetic name, don't you think? But before we hop, skip, and jump into Nelson Mandela's days of global fame, Nobel Peace Prizes, and imposing statues, let's take a stroll through his early years, a time when his rebellious spirit was more about swiping corn from a neighbor's field than toppling regimes. Raleigh was born into the Thembu royal family, but don't let the word royal fool you into thinking he was swaddled in silk and feasted on caviar. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakaniswa, was a local chief and counsellor to the Thembu king. This didn't mean castles and crowns, but rather a respected position in a society where cattle were the currency and community meetings were the battlegrounds for ideas. Life in Mvizo was about as rural as it gets. Think huts with thatched roofs, vast open landscapes, and a daily rhythm dictated by the rising and setting sun. Now, Mandela's father might not have had a throne, but he had something arguably more powerful: stories. Gadla was a master storyteller, weaving tales of African history and heroes during the evening gatherings by the fire. These were not bedtime stories designed to lull the listener into a peaceful slumber. Oh no, these tales were fuel for the imagination, lessons in leadership, courage, and justice. They were the original TED talks of their time, minus the PowerPoint slides. But life wasn't all storytelling and stargazing. Young Mandela's childhood was marked by a blend of traditional education and early exposure to the colonial world. When he was 9, his father passed away, leaving him in the guardianship of Jangintaba Dalindibo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. Talk about moving up in the world. For Mandela, this meant leaving Mvizo for the larger village of Quinu, and later, the regent's great place at Mkuhakisweni. It was in this new environment that Mandela began to learn the art of leadership, not just through observation, but by engaging in spirited debates with his peers. Mandela's educational journey is the stuff of legends, though it started in a rather unassuming manner. His first day at the local Methodist school was marked by a curious colonial custom. The teacher, presumably tired of wrestling with coarser pronunciations, decided to give the students English names. And just like that, Raleigh became Nelson. Why Nelson? Well, the teacher never explained, leaving us to ponder whether it was a nod to British naval hero Admiral Nelson, or simply the result of pulling a name out of a hat. Either way, the boy with a mischievous streak and an insatiable curiosity was now Nelson Mandela. Speaking of mischief, there's a delightful little anecdote that showcases young Nelson's rebellious streak. It's the tale of the great corn heist. Picture this: a group of boys, including Mandela, sneaking into a neighbor's field to pilfer some corn. Not exactly the crime of the century, but in a community that valued honesty, it was a serious infraction. They were caught, of course, because kids are terrible at covering their tracks, and brought before their teacher for a stern talking to. Instead of severe punishment, the reprimand was more of a life lesson wrapped in love. Mandela would later say that this incident taught him the importance of accountability and respect for others' property. Lessons like these were the building blocks of his disciplined, yet defiant nature. Mandela's school days were a blend of academic pursuits and extracurricular adventures, where he learned not just the rudiments of reading and writing, but also the value of resilience and adaptability. Education wasn't just about books. It was about understanding a world that was rapidly changing around him. The British had their tentacles deeply embedded in South African society, and Mandela was acutely aware of the cultural and political dynamics at play. It's fascinating to think that amidst learning arithmetic and grammar, Mandela was already grappling with the concepts of justice and equality. Despite the challenges and the occasional reprimand, there was an undeniable charm to Mandela's early life, a sense of purpose slowly taking shape. The influence of his father's stories, his education under the regent's watchful eye, and his own natural curiosity were all converging to form the foundation of a man who would one day challenge the very system that had shaped his upbringing. But for now, he was a young boy in a rural village, dreaming big dreams and occasionally getting into a bit of trouble, just as his name suggested. So there you have it, the early chapters of Nelson Mandela's life, a blend of tradition and transition, storytelling and schooling, discipline and daring. The seeds of revolution were planted not in grand gestures, but in simple acts of learning and listening. And as we continue to explore his journey, remember that even the greatest of leaders start somewhere small, perhaps with a handful of corn and a gentle reprimand. Fast forward a few years, and Nelson Mandela is swapping his rural roots for the lecture halls of Fort Hare University. Now, Fort Hare isn't just any university. This was the Ivy League of black education in South Africa, a prestigious institution where young minds came to foster their revolutionary dreams. But even in this bastion of enlightenment, apartheid's ominous shadow loomed large. The year is 1939, and while the world teeters on the brink of war, Mandela is engaged in battles of a different kind, ones fought with ideas and ideals. At Fort Hare, Mandela encountered what you might call the who's who of future African leadership. Among his peers were Oliver Tambo and Robert Sobukwe, names that would later become synonymous with the anti-apartheid struggle. It's like the universe decided to gather a hall of fame of change makers under one thatched roof. But Mandela wasn't just there to rub shoulders. No, sir, he was making waves, or perhaps ripples at first. He joined the Student Representative Council, where he quickly realized that being a leader wasn't just about speeches and slogans. It was about making tough choices. When the council decided to boycott the university's policies, Mandela was front and center, advocating for change. Alas, this act of defiance didn't win him any popularity contests with the administration. In fact, it got him expelled. Talk about a minor setback on the road to greatness. Undeterred, Mandela made his way to Johannesburg, the city of gold, in 1941. Johannesburg was a bustling metropolis, a place where dreams were forged or crushed under the weight of racial segregation. Here, Mandela found work as a night watchman, hardly the glamorous job title you'd expect for a future icon. But it paid the bills, or at least some of them, and more importantly, it connected him with Walter Sisulu, a fellow activist and the man who would become Mandela's lifelong friend and political mentor. Sisulu saw something in Mandela, a spark perhaps, and encouraged him to pursue a law degree at the University of Witwatersrand. The University of Witwatersrand, affectionately known as WITS, was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, except, of course, if you were black. Mandela was one of a handful of black students, navigating a sea of white faces and systemic racism. It was here that Mandela honed his legal skills, sharpening his arguments like a craftsman with a particularly stubborn piece of wood. But it wasn't all serious law books and courtroom dramas. Mandela also developed a reputation for his sense of humor. There's a famous courtroom incident where, faced with the absurdities of apartheid laws, Mandela quipped about the ridiculousness of a system where race determined your place in society. His humor was a tool, a way to disarm opponents and make friends out of foes, or at least make them chuckle before they disagreed. By the mid-1940s, Mandela was knee-deep in activism, with both feet firmly planted in the African National Congress, ANC. Founded in 1912, the ANC was the torchbearer for black rights in South Africa, but by the 1940s, it needed a breath of fresh air. Enter the ANC Youth League, established in 1944 by Mandela, Sisulu and Tambo, among others. Their aim was to inject new energy and radical ideas into the ANC, turning it from a polite protest party into a powerhouse of resistance. This was no easy task, given the political climate of the time. South Africa was a country divided along racial lines, with laws that seemed plucked from a dystopian novel. But the Youth League was up for the challenge, demanding a more militant approach to dismantling apartheid. The 1940s and 50s were a time of upheaval, not just in South Africa, but globally. World War II had ended, and the world was reeling from its aftermath. Economies were rebuilding, borders were being redrawn, and colonial empires were crumbling. South Africa, however, seemed intent on clinging to its oppressive ways, doubling down on segregation laws. For Mandela and his comrades, this was a call to action. They organized protests, strikes, and campaigns designed to rattle the status quo. The Defiance Campaign of 1952 was one such initiative, a mass movement of civil disobedience where people deliberately broke apartheid laws. It was risky, audacious, and exactly the kind of bold move that Mandela thrived on. As the 1950s marched on, Mandela's legal career was also gaining momentum. In 1952, he opened South Africa's first black law firm with Oliver Tambo. Tucked away in a bustling part of Johannesburg, Mandela and Tambo became a beacon of hope for black South Africans navigating a Kafkaesque legal system designed to stymie them at every turn. The firm was a lifeline, providing affordable legal counsel to those who needed it most. And trust me, in a country where your skin color could land you in jail for walking on the wrong side of the street, legal counsel was in high demand. But Mandela's rise in the political and legal arenas wasn't without its challenges. The government wasn't exactly thrilled with his activities, and he was arrested multiple times. These weren't just slaps on the wrist. They were calculated moves to silence a growing voice of dissent. Yet each arrest seemed to galvanize him, reinforcing his resolve to fight the system. It was clear by now that Mandela wasn't just playing a role in history. He was actively shaping it. As the narrative continues to unfold, remember that Mandela's journey was one of constant evolution, one that defied the odds and challenged the norms. He was a man of many paradoxes, a rebel with a cause, a jokester in a courtroom, and a leader who drew strength from the very people he sought to uplift. Each chapter of his life offers new insights, and at times new questions. What drives a man to fight against an entire system? How does humor become a weapon in the battle for justice? The answers are as complex as the man himself, a man who would one day stand as a symbol of freedom and resilience. So, as we keep delving into Mandela's extraordinary life, remember this. History isn't just a sequence of events. It's a tapestry of stories, woven with threads of struggle, triumph, and yes, a fair bit of humor. And in Mandela's case, it's a tapestry that continues to inspire generations to challenge the injustices of their own time. And so, as we continue our journey through the life of Nelson Mandela, let's set the stage for one of the most dramatic episodes in his saga, the Rivonia trial. We're talking about a courtroom drama that makes Hollywood thrillers look like amateur hour. But before the gavel swung and the world watched, let's explore how Mandela found himself in the crosshairs of an apartheid system intent on making him disappear. By the early 1960s, Mandela wasn't just a thorn in the side of the apartheid regime. He was the whole rose bush. His involvement with the African National Congress, ANC, and their increasingly militant offshoot, Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, or Spear of the Nation, had the government quaking in their boots, or perhaps their polished Oxfords. MK was no knitting club. They were orchestrating acts of sabotage against government infrastructure, aiming to shake the foundations of apartheid without shedding blood. But as you might guess, the regime wasn't too keen on distinguishing between sabotage and all-out war. In 1961, Mandela adopted the moniker Black Pimpernel due to his uncanny ability to elude police capture while organizing underground activities. And no, he wasn't hiding in a secret lair with gadgets and gizmos. His hideouts were often rural farms and safe houses, places that epitomized the resilience and resourcefulness of the anti-apartheid movement. But even the most elusive fox eventually gets caught, and Mandela's arrest on August 5, 1962, was a calculated move by the state, aided by, you guessed it, a tip-off from the CIA. Yes, folks, even the Cold War had its tendrils in South Africa. Mandela's initial arrest led to a 5-year sentence for inciting workers' strikes and leaving the country illegally. However, while he was in custody, the police stumbled upon a treasure trove of incriminating documents at Lillisleaf Farm in Rivonia, Johannesburg, MK's secret headquarters. These documents detailed elaborate plans for guerrilla warfare and sabotage, setting the stage for what became known as the Rivonia trial. The trial kicked off in October 1963, and it was more than just a legal battle. It was a stage for Mandela and his co-defendants to put apartheid itself on trial. Picture this. Instead of pleading for mercy, Mandela delivered a speech that would echo through history. His words were a masterclass in defiance and eloquence, as he declared, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities." It was a verbal mic drop that resonated worldwide. The Rivonia trial wasn't just about sentencing a group of men. It was a farcical display of apartheid justice, a kangaroo court with a predetermined outcome. Mandela and his co-defendants faced charges that included sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. If convicted, they were staring down the barrel of the death penalty. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, but Mandela's sharp wit cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. When asked by the judge if he was prepared to die, Mandela coolly replied, "If needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Talk about having nerves of steel. This trial was a global spectacle, drawing attention from across the planet. The United Nations, various governments, and countless activists called for the defendants' release, highlighting the absurdity of condemning men for seeking equality. But the South African government was more concerned with quelling dissent than appeasing the international community. On June 12, 1964, Mandela and 7 others were sentenced to life imprisonment. And just like that, the world watched as Mandela was whisked away to Robben Island, a windswept outcrop 7 kilometers from Cape Town, which was hardly Club Med. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the notion that Mandela spent his prison years in saintly patience, whiling away the hours like a monk in meditation. Reality check. Robben Island was no retreat. Mandela and fellow inmates endured hard labor, breaking rocks into gravel and toiling in a lime quarry. Conditions were harsh, the food was abysmal, and the routine was grueling. But even in this bleak setting, Mandela's strategic mind was anything but idle. Inside the island's confines, Mandela became a master of psychological chess. He wielded humor like a blade, using it to keep spirits high and foster unity among prisoners. The guards, initially hostile, soon found themselves unwitting participants in Mandela's charm offensive. It was a subtle form of resistance, a way of undermining the oppressive environment with smiles and jokes. But make no mistake, beneath the genial surface, Mandela was always plotting, always thinking several moves ahead. He turned Robben Island into an extension of his political education. Dubbed the University of Robben Island, the prison became a place of learning, where inmates shared knowledge, debated politics, and honed their ideological skills. Mandela, ever the teacher, imparted lessons on leadership and resilience, ensuring that when they left the island, they would be stronger and more determined than when they arrived. And let's not gloss over the global response to Mandela's imprisonment. His trial and subsequent sentence sparked outrage and fueled the anti-apartheid movement worldwide. Sanctions and boycotts against South Africa began to gather steam, as countries and corporations faced mounting pressure to cut ties with the apartheid regime. Mandela became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of hope, a beacon for those fighting oppression everywhere. Yet, it's crucial to note that Mandela wasn't some lone hero, single-handedly taking on apartheid. He was part of a broader movement, a collective of brave individuals who risked everything for the cause. Figures like Oliver Tambo, Albertina Sisulu, and Desmond Tutu played pivotal roles in sustaining the fight, both within South Africa and on the international stage. Mandela's imprisonment galvanized their efforts, turning an icon into a rallying cry. As we continue our exploration of Mandela's life, remember that his journey was one of constant adaptation and relentless resilience. The Rivonia trial and his years on Robben Island were not the end, but merely a chapter in a life dedicated to justice and equality. So, buckle up, because the story is far from over. There's more to uncover, more to challenge, and more to learn from a man who turned the world's gaze toward the injustices of his time and dared to imagine a brighter future. As Nelson Mandela languished on Robben Island, The world outside was changing at a pace that would make even the most seasoned time traveler dizzy. By the time the gates swung open for Mandela's release on February 11, 1990, he'd been in prison for 27 years. That's the kind of sentence that would make a Roman gladiator wince. Mandela emerged to a world that was both familiar and foreign, like returning to your hometown only to find it overrun by hipsters and artisan coffee shops. The South Africa that Mandela walked into was teetering on the brink of transformation. The Berlin Wall had crumbled just months before, and the Soviet Union was unraveling faster than a cheap ball of yarn. Globally, the tide was turning against apartheid, with economic sanctions squeezing South Africa like a boa constrictor. Domestically, the pressure was mounting with increasing internal unrest. The apartheid regime, led by F.W. de Klerk, realized it was time for a change of script if they wanted to avoid starring in a Shakespearean tragedy. Mandela, ever the strategist, understood that his release was just the opening act of a much larger drama. Next 4 years would be a roller coaster ride of negotiations, setbacks, and breakthroughs, as South Africa grappled with the monumental task of transitioning from a pariah state to a fledgling democracy. And who was at the helm of this precarious ship? None other than Mandela himself, with his unique blend of charm, wisdom, and an uncanny ability to make even the stiffest politicians crack a smile. Negotiations with the National Party were akin to a high-stakes poker game, where Mandela's aces were patience and empathy. For instance, during one particularly tense meeting, de Klerk attempted to play hardball, suggesting that Mandela's ANC was merely a front for communist interests. Rather than taking the bait, Mandela responded with a calm, measured rebuttal. He'd had nearly 3 decades to perfect the art of patience, after all. In the midst of these delicate discussions, Mandela also had to navigate the world of modern technology, a landscape as foreign to him as Robben Island was to a luxury cruise liner. Legend has it that upon encountering a fax machine, Mandela was utterly bemused. Here was a man capable of dismantling a regime, yet a simple piece of office equipment left him scratching his head. It's a delightful image, isn't it? The great revolutionary, befuddled by a relic of the modern office. But this anecdote serves as a metaphor for the challenges of adaptation and change, both personally and politically. As negotiations continued, the economic factors at play were impossible to ignore. The apartheid regime had been hemorrhaging economically, thanks in no small part to international sanctions. By the late 1980s, South Africa's GDP growth was a sluggish 1%. And inflation was skyrocketing. De Klerk's government knew that without economic stability, political reform was a pipe dream. Mandela, aware of these vulnerabilities, leveraged them with the finesse of a chess master, pushing for a democratic transition that was as economically viable as it was politically necessary. The road to South Africa's first democratic elections was anything but smooth. The country was a powder keg of racial tensions, with groups like the Inkatha Freedom Party, clashing violently with ANC supporters. Mandela, though, was a maestro of reconciliation, wielding his charisma like a conductor's baton. He crisscrossed the nation, urging peace and unity, often employing humor to disarm potential adversaries. At one rally, when faced with a particularly hostile crowd, Mandela quipped about the absurdity of fighting amongst themselves when the real enemy was the system that divided them. Negotiations culminated in the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODSA, a series of talks that were as complicated as a Rubik's Cube on steroids. The aim was simple: dismantle apartheid and establish a new democratic constitution. The reality, however, was a labyrinth of political posturing and ideological clashes. Yet, through it all, Mandela remained the calm eye of the storm, guiding the process with a steady hand and a vision of a united South Africa. By the time April 27, 1994, rolled around, South Africa was ready to take its place on the world stage as a democratic nation. The elections were a logistical behemoth, involving over 19 million voters and a budget of nearly $200 million. It was a Herculean task, but one that underscored the determination and resilience of a country poised to rewrite its own narrative. Mandela's own journey to the presidency was the stuff of legend. From a prisoner on Robben Island to the first black president of South Africa, It was a trajectory that defied the odds and captured the world's imagination. But let's not sugarcoat it. Mandela's road was paved with challenges, sacrifices, and countless untold stories of courage and tenacity. As Mandela cast his vote for the first time, there was a palpable sense of history in the making. His election victory was not just a personal triumph. It was a collective achievement for millions who had fought, suffered, and dreamed of a better tomorrow. And yet, Mandela's ascent to the presidency was only the beginning of another chapter, one that would involve healing a nation scarred by decades of division and inequality. In the end, Mandela's legacy is not just about the man himself, but about the movement he embodied and the people he inspired. His journey from prisoner to president is a testament to the power of resilience, humor, and humanity in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And as South Africa took its first steps into an uncertain future, Mandela stood as a beacon of hope, proving that even the longest road begins with a single step. So as we wrap up this segment of Mandela's story, remember that his legacy isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living, breathing reminder of the power of change, the importance of courage, and the enduring impact of a life dedicated to justice and equality. And while the narrative continues to unfold, with many chapters still to explore, one thing is clear. Mandela's story is far from over. It's a tale that continues to inspire, challenge, and remind us that even the most daunting journeys begin with a simple act of courage. Mandela's presidency was less a victory lap and more a baptism by fire. The world was watching, and the stakes were monumental. He had to transform a nation deeply entrenched in racial division into a unified democracy. No pressure, right? While many expected a magic wand solution, the reality was more akin to untangling a century-old knot. South Africa was a nation of stark contrasts, a modern economy with first-world infrastructure on one side, and on the other, townships where poverty clung to the air like a stubborn fog. One of Mandela's first acts as president was to set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, under the stewardship of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The TRC was an ambitious attempt to heal the nation's wounds by allowing victims and perpetrators of apartheid-era atrocities to share their stories. It's like couples therapy, but on a national scale, minus the couch, and with way more emotional baggage. The idea was simple yet radical: expose the truth to foster reconciliation. It was a process fraught with pain as individuals relived the horrors of the past. Yet, it was also a testament to Mandela's belief in forgiveness as a path to healing. For many, the TRC was a cathartic experience, but let's not gloss over the fact that justice was sometimes sacrificed at the altar of reconciliation. Mandela's leadership style was a masterclass in political jiu-jitsu. He employed gestures that were as symbolic as they were strategic. Take the 1995 Rugby World Cup, for instance. Rugby was a sport loved by South Africa's white minority, a group that had historically been as receptive to change as a cat to a bath. By donning the Springbok jersey and presenting the trophy to Captain Francois Pienaar, Mandela executed a PR move so genius it could have made Machiavelli blush. That single act did more to bridge racial divides than 1,000 speeches ever could. It was a powerful example of how Mandela wielded symbolism like a maestro conducting a symphony of unity. But let's not romanticize this picture into oblivion. The transition was far from harmonious. Economically, South Africa was like a toddler learning to walk, wobbly and prone to face planting. The GDP was growing at a tepid 3% in the mid-90s, a figure that would make any finance minister reach for the aspirin. Poverty and unemployment were rampant, with about 20% of the population living in informal settlements. The gap between the rich and poor was as wide as the Grand Canyon, and that's putting it mildly. Mandela's government faced the Herculean task of balancing economic growth with social justice. The Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, was launched with the aim of addressing socio-economic inequalities and creating jobs. But like trying to fill a bathtub with a teaspoon, the progress was slow. Critics argued that the RDP was too ambitious and underfunded, while supporters believed it laid the groundwork for future reforms. Either way, Mandela knew that Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither would the new South Africa be. Politically, Mandela's presidency was a tightrope walk over a pit of ravenous crocodiles. He had to placate the fears of the white minority while addressing the legitimate grievances of the black majority. It was a delicate balance, akin to juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Mandela's charisma and gravitas helped him navigate these treacherous waters, but he also relied on a team of capable leaders, including his deputy president, Thabo Mbeki, and the finance minister, Trevor Manuel, who managed to steer the economy towards stability. And let's debunk the myth that Mandela ruled with an iron fist. If anything, his leadership was characterized by consensus building and consultation. He wasn't a dictator doling out decrees from on high. Instead, he was a facilitator, encouraging dialogue and giving voice to a diverse range of opinions. This approach, while noble, sometimes led to criticism that he was too soft, too willing to compromise. But Mandela understood that democracy is a messy business, more Jackson Pollock than Leonardo da Vinci. Mandela's presidency wasn't without its share of controversy. His stance on HIV/AIDS, for instance, was criticized as being too passive at a time when the epidemic was a growing concern. It was a rare misstep for a leader whose instincts were usually spot on. However, Mandela would later become an outspoken advocate for HIV/AIDS awareness, encouraging testing and treatment, a testament to his ability to learn and adapt. As Mandela's presidency drew to a close in 1999, he left behind a country still grappling with its past, but also daring to dream of a brighter future. He chose not to seek re-election, a decision that was both expected and extraordinary. In a continent where power often clings to leaders like a second skin, Mandela's voluntary step down was a powerful message. Leadership is about service, not self-aggrandizement. Mandela's legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of struggle, resilience, humor, and humanity. He was a man who could move seamlessly from the gravitas of statecraft to the lightness of laughter. His ability to inspire forgiveness in a nation scarred by decades of division cements his place as a revolutionary leader. But let's be clear, Mandela wasn't a saint. He was a man of flesh and blood, with flaws and failings like the rest of us. What set him apart was his unwavering commitment to justice and equality, his ability to dream of a better world and work tirelessly to bring that vision to life. As we reflect on Mandela's life and legacy, let's remember the lessons he taught us, not just through his words, but through his actions. He showed us that change is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. He reminded us that humor can be a powerful tool in the fight for justice, that forgiveness is a radical act of courage, and that the journey to freedom is a marathon, not a sprint. In the end, Mandela's story is not just about a man who fought against apartheid. It's about a man who fought for the dignity and humanity of all people. It's a story that continues to inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of resilience and hope. As we close this chapter on Mandela's presidency, let's carry forward his legacy by daring to dream and striving to create a world that reflects the ideals he held dear. Because, in the words of the man himself, what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. When you think of the Bedouins, it's easy to picture a group of rugged individuals who might as well have invented the concept of the open road, except their road was a sprawling sea of sand stretching as far as the eye could see. Picture this ancient crew as history's original road warriors, cruising the Arabian Peninsula around 6000 BCE in their camel-powered caravans. And if you think your daily commute is rough, these folks had a whole different scale of tough. Bedouin lifestyle was built on a foundation of family ties and tribal loyalty. They weren't just a loose collection of wanderers. These were highly organized tribal units, each with its own leader or sheikh. It's like the ultimate family road trip, but instead of arguing over the radio, they were focused on survival and trading goods across vast, unforgiving landscapes. And let's not forget their VIPs, the camels. These creatures weren't just a mode of transport. They were the Bedouins' lifeline, hauling water, goods, and sometimes acting as the ultimate desert Uber for long treks. Now, about those distances. The Bedouins didn't just meander through the dunes aimlessly. They traveled hundreds of miles, from the depths of Arabia to the fringes of the Levant and beyond. Think of it as the original long-haul trucking, minus the diesel engine and roadside diners. It's estimated that they covered distances that would take modern digital nomads a couple of flights and a few layovers to match, except the Bedouins did it with nothing but the stars to guide them. Numbers matter, so let's talk population. Back in their heyday, the Bedouin tribes weren't just small bands of nomads. They were a thriving community. Estimates suggest there were hundreds of thousands of them, spread across the Arabian Peninsula. The population density was low, sure, but when you've got miles upon miles of desert to roam, social distancing wasn't exactly a concern. Survival in the desert wasn't just a matter of wandering around until you hit an oasis. The Bedouins had a toolkit of survival strategies that would make Bear Grylls nod in approval. Water was scarce, so they developed an acute sense of where to find it. Think of them as the original water diviners. They knew the desert like the back of their hands, understanding the subtle signs of approaching storms or where the next well might be hidden beneath the sand. Now, let's sprinkle in some modern humor. Today's digital nomads like to think of themselves as the cutting edge of the remote work lifestyle. They hop from one trendy coffee shop to another, latte in hand, Wi-Fi at the ready. The Bedouins, however, had their own version of the cloud, except it was made of actual clouds, bringing much-needed rain to their parched lands. While modern nomads fret over battery life, the Bedouins' biggest concern was making sure their camels had enough water to keep plodding along. And let's not romanticize this too much. The desert was no Instagram backdrop. It was harsh, unforgiving, and brutally honest. The Bedouins didn't have the luxury of retreating to a cozy co-working space when the going got tough. If they didn't move, they didn't survive. Their lives were a constant balancing act between the merciless elements and the need to trade and connect with other tribes and settlements. In essence, the Bedouins were the ultimate pragmatists. Their lifestyle was dictated by necessity, not choice. They adopted a minimalist ethos long before it was cool, carrying only what was essential for survival and trade. They understood the value of community, where tribal bonds weren't just social connections. They were lifelines. As you can see, the Bedouins were more than just desert wanderers. They were a society built on resilience, adaptability, and a deep understanding of their environment. They navigated the vast deserts of the Arabian Peninsula with a kind of wisdom and endurance that, let's be honest, would put most of our modern conveniences to shame. Now, let's take a turn down the dusty trade routes that define the Bedouins' economic life. Picture a sprawling network of paths, more intricate than a spider's web, weaving across the Middle East. This isn't some quaint bizarre scene from a movie. We're talking serious commerce here. The Bedouins were the ultimate middlemen, the Amazon prime of the ancient world, except their delivery guarantee was somewhat at the mercy of sandstorms and marauding bandits. Trade was the lifeblood coursing through the veins of Bedouin society. Forget Wall Street. These guys were trading before stocks were even a glint in the eye of capitalism. Their primary offerings, spices, textiles, and livestock that could practically move their stock prices up. Spices like frankincense and myrrh were the Bitcoin of the ancient world, highly sought after for their use in religious rituals, perfumes, and even medicine. And textiles. Well, let's just say that even then, everyone wanted to look stylish, albeit in a more practical, sun-protective way. Let's dive into some numbers to get a sense of scale. These trade routes weren't just a couple of camel caravans traipsing across the dunes. At their peak, the Bedouins could move goods across distances of up to 500 miles. Imagine schlepping your goods from the southern Arabian Peninsula all the way to the bustling markets of Damascus or Baghdad. That's like walking from New York to Miami, with no pit stops for a big gulp. Now about those livestock. Camels were the obvious MVPs, but goats were the Bedouin equivalent of stock options, low maintenance and always a sound investment. A single goat could provide milk, meat, and fiber, making it a multitasking marvel in a world where survival depended on resourcefulness. Let's not kid ourselves, though. While the idea of trading in goats sounds quaint, the reality was far less pastoral. The desert sun could be as unforgiving as a Wall Street bear market. And then there was coffee. Yes, you heard that right. The same magical beans that fuel our modern world had their roots in the Bedouin trade routes. The Bedouins were early adopters of this energizing brew, long before it became the global obsession we know today. Picture weary traders stopping for a coffee break, sipping the original cup of joe under a canopy of stars. It wasn't Starbucks, but it got the job done. But before you get swept away by the romance of the noble desert trader, let's hit pause and take a reality check. This wasn't an Instagrammable adventure with picturesque sunsets over the dunes. Trading was perilous business. Caravans had to navigate treacherous terrain, and if the elements didn't get you, bandits might. The desert didn't just test your endurance, it tested your mettle. Bedouin traders had to be as shrewd as they were tough, negotiating not just prices, but also the very terms of their survival. The Bedouins' trade routes weren't just economic veins, they were cultural arteries, carrying ideas and innovations alongside material goods. These interactions facilitated a flow of cultural exchange that would influence the regions they connected, making the Bedouins unwitting ambassadors of cultural diffusion. The exchange wasn't all one way, though. The Bedouins absorbed influences from the civilizations they traded with, adapting foreign elements into their own practices and enriching their cultural tapestry. In essence, while the romantic image of the Bedouin trader galloping across the sands with the wind in his hair sounds appealing, the truth was far more complex. These were people who lived on the edge, balancing the harsh realities of desert life with the opportunities afforded by trade. They were the ultimate pragmatists, navigating an unforgiving environment with the same dexterity they used to strike a trade deal. And while the world around them has changed dramatically, the legacy of their trade networks continues to echo through history, a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. As we prepare to delve deeper into the Bedouins' way of life, their economic endeavors reveal a society that was as adaptable as it was resilient. The Bedouins weren't just wanderers. They were savvy entrepreneurs, masters of their domain, and unsung architects of trade routes that shaped the ancient world. They remind us that history is not just about grand empires and towering achievements, but also about the unsung individuals navigating the sands of time with grit and determination. Now, let's pivot from the trade caravans plowing through endless dunes to a different kind of journey, the cultural and social tapestry of Bedouin life. You might be tempted to envision a group of people whose idea of entertainment was watching the sands shift, but that couldn't be further from the truth. These folks were cultural powerhouses, weaving stories, poetry, and music into the very fabric of their existence. Their oral traditions weren't just campfire tales. They were living archives, as essential as any written record. Consider this. In a world where libraries were as rare as a cool breeze in the desert, the Bedouins turned to their poets and storytellers as custodians of history and wisdom. Picture a young Bedouin lad, hanging on to every word of an elder recounting the tribe's glorious past or a particularly clever trade negotiation. In a society where literacy was as scarce as rainfall, these oral narratives were the glue that held their collective memory together. It wasn't just about entertainment. These stories were their history books, their family albums, and their moral guides rolled into one. Let's dive into the numbers for a moment. Imagine a tribe consisting of a few hundred individuals, each with stories handed down through generations. Multiply that by the numerous tribes scattered across the Arabian Peninsula, and you've got a narrative network that rivals any modern-day social media platform. Yes, the Bedouin storytellers were the influencers of their time, shaping perceptions and preserving traditions with the power of the spoken word. These bards of the desert could make or break reputations with a single poetic verse. And in a world without retweets or hashtags, that's saying something. Speaking of poetry, let's not overlook the fact that Bedouin poetry wasn't just some flowery pastime. It was a form of social currency, a means of asserting identity and prowess. The ability to craft a poignant verse could elevate a person's status within the tribe, making poets akin to rock stars in their own right. Take Imru al-Qais, for instance, one of the most famous pre-Islamic poets. His verses were so impactful that they were reportedly hung on the Kaaba in Mecca. Imagine your tweets getting pinned to the town square for all to see. But while we're here, let's unravel a few myths about Bedouin life. It's easy to romanticize the image of the noble tribesman, strumming an oud under the moonlit sky, but the reality was more nuanced. This wasn't the Arabian Nights come to life. It was a tough existence where every element of culture served a practical purpose. Stories and songs were tools for survival, teaching young Bedouins about geography, clan history, and even strategies for dealing with rival tribes. In this way, their culture was less about escapism and more about education and cohesion. Now, let's shift the spotlight to the unsung heroines of this narrative, the women of Bedouin society. Forget the tired trope of the veiled, subservient damsel. Bedouin women wielded considerable influence and autonomy, often surprising to those who buy into outdated stereotypes. They were the backbone of the social structure, managing households and even participating in decision-making processes. In some tribes, women could inherit property, and their opinions carried weight in tribal councils. This wasn't an anomaly. It was an integral part of their societal fabric. Take Khadija bint Khuwaylid, for example. Before she became the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, she was a successful businesswoman in her own right, managing trade caravans with the savvy of a modern-day CEO. Her story might sound like an exception, but it reflects the degree of agency Bedouin women could exercise, particularly in economic spheres. So, let's dispel the myth that Bedouin women were merely passive participants in their society. They were involved in everything from poetry to politics, often playing critical roles in maintaining the tribe's cohesion. While the patriarchal structure did impose certain restrictions, Bedouin women knew how to navigate these boundaries, exerting influence in ways that were subtle yet profound. In essence, the social and cultural aspects of Bedouin life were as rich and varied as the sands they traversed. Their oral traditions, poetry, and music were not just forms of entertainment, but vital components of their identity and survival. Women played indispensable roles, challenging simplistic stereotypes and demonstrating a level of autonomy that might surprise modern audiences. The Bedouin storytellers, much like today's influencers, wielded the power to shape narratives and preserve the legacy of a people whose lives were as complex as they were resilient. As we continue to peel back the layers of Bedouin society, remember that every story, song, and verse was a thread in a much larger tapestry, one that connected their past to the present in ways that continue to resonate. So stay tuned as we dig even deeper into the fascinating world of these desert nomads, where history and legend intertwine in a dance as intricate as any of their poetic verses. As we dive headfirst into the political arena of the Bedouins, let's pause to appreciate the irony. A group often romanticized as perpetual rebels, akin to desert anarchists, were actually quite adept at playing the geopolitical game. The myth of the always rebellious Bedouin is as alluring as it is misleading. Sure, they clashed with empires, but they also formed alliances and manipulated politics like seasoned diplomats. In other words, the Bedouins weren't just the wild cards of the desert. They were the shrewd strategists hiding behind the veil of sandstorms. Let's dig into the nitty-gritty of Bedouin politics, starting with their interactions with expanding empires. Take the Byzantine Empire, for instance. During the 6th century, the Byzantines saw the value in having the Bedouins as allies rather than adversaries. They offered subsidies, yes, literal money, for Bedouin tribes to patrol the desert borders against other nomadic tribes and rival empires. It's like hiring the neighborhood watch, but on a grander scale, with payment in gold instead of goodwill. The Ghassanids, a prominent Bedouin tribe, became vassals to the Byzantines, serving as their buffer zone against the Persian Sassanids. This was no small alliance. It was a strategic move that kept the Byzantine Eastern Front relatively stable for decades. But don't be fooled. These alliances were as stable as a sandcastle at high tide. The Bedouins were masters of the pivot, and loyalty was often proportional to the size of the purse. When the Islamic caliphates rose to power, the Bedouin tribes saw an opportunity. Many of them, including the previously Byzantine-aligned Ghassanids, switched allegiances faster than you can say jihad. By the 7th century, the Bedouins played a crucial role in the early Islamic conquests. Their knowledge of the desert proved invaluable in the rapid expansion of the caliphate, and they participated in battles that reshaped the Middle Eastern geopolitical landscape. Now, let's not gloss over the skirmishes. The Bedouins weren't just playing defense, knew how to hold their own in a fight. They had a reputation for being fierce warriors, using the desert to their advantage. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates both found themselves at odds with Bedouin tribes at various points, struggling to exert control over these nomadic groups. Imagine trying to catch a sandstorm with a butterfly net. Controlling the Bedouins was just as futile. When the Abbasids moved their capital to Baghdad, in 762 CE. They faced revolts from Bedouin tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. These skirmishes were less about open rebellion and more about maintaining autonomy in a rapidly changing world. Speaking of autonomy, let's address the elephant in the tent, the idea that Bedouins were anarchists who rejected all forms of centralized authority. This is as much a myth as the idea of camels as cuddly pets. Bedouin tribes often adhered to a strict internal hierarchy, with a sheikh at the helm, and they were known to participate in the politics of settled societies when it suited them. They were less about chaos and more about calculated resistance, willing to negotiate, fight, or flee depending on what the situation demanded. Let's segue into the realm of primary sources, where the real gems of Bedouin political maneuvering lie. Take the writings of the 14th century Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun, who described the Bedouin tribes as adept at leveraging their mobility for both raiding and diplomacy. He observed that their willingness to adapt to different political landscapes made them formidable players in the ever-shifting power dynamics of the region. Khaldun's observations remind us that politics, much like fashion, is cyclical. What's old becomes new again, and the Bedouins were always ahead of the trend. Fast forward a bit to the 20th century, and the Bedouins are still making waves in the political pool. During the First World War, British officer T.E. Lawrence, famously known as Lawrence of Arabia, capitalized on the Bedouins' strategic importance. He forged alliances with Arabian tribes to orchestrate a revolt against the Ottoman Empire. This wasn't just a matter of military strategy, but also a masterclass in political persuasion. Lawrence knew that the key to success lay in appealing to the Bedouins' sense of autonomy and their historical grievances against the Ottomans. The resulting Arab revolt of 1916 was as much a testament to Bedouin agency as it was to Lawrence's understanding of their political psyche. Yet, as the dust settled after the war, the Bedouins faced the emergence of modern nation-states, a concept as foreign to them as a snowstorm in the Sahara. The drawing of arbitrary borders by colonial powers like Britain and France didn't consider the tribal lines that had governed the Arabian Peninsula for centuries. Suddenly, the Bedouins found themselves citizens of nations they hadn't exactly signed up for. This transition from autonomous tribes to reluctant nationals was less of a seamless integration and more of a forced adaptation. The concept of national borders was antithetical to their nomadic lifestyle, and they often resisted, sometimes through negotiation and other times via outright defiance. Let's sprinkle in some modern context. Even today, the Bedouins navigate the complexities of political identity, balancing their traditional ways with the demands of modern nation-states. In countries like Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Bedouins contribute to national identity, yet they still fight for recognition and rights within the political framework. The romantic image of the rebellious Bedouin is not just a vestige of the past, but a reflection of ongoing struggles for autonomy and respect. It's a reminder that while the players have changed, the game remains the same: power, politics, and the ever-persistent quest for identity. In examining the political dynamics of the Bedouins, we see a group that was anything but static. They were opportunistic yet principled, rebellious yet diplomatic, embodying contradictions that made them both enigmatic and influential. Their story is not just one of survival, but of strategic engagement with the world around them. So as we continue our exploration, remember that the Bedouins were not merely subjects of history, but active participants, shaping and being shaped by the political tides of their time. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this saga, where we'll delve deeper into the modern implications of their remarkable journey through the sands of time. But as we continue our trek on this historical safari, it's time to fast forward and see how the Bedouins have navigated the trials of modernity. If you thought they were just going to fade into the background of history like a mirage, think again. These desert dwellers are still in the game, proving they're as adaptable as a chameleon at a paintball match. First, let's talk technology. And no, I don't mean Camel 2. Zero. The advent of technology was like a plot twist worthy of a blockbuster movie for the Bedouins. Mobile phones and GPS have replaced the stars as navigational guides, and you can bet Camel's ears perked up at the idea of a four-wheel drive. Trucks and jeeps have become the new beasts of burden, making long-distance travel less about survival and more about speed. But let's not pretend this transition was seamless. Just as they had to adjust to the Byzantine and Islamic empires, the Bedouins now found themselves negotiating with the empire of technology. In Saudi Arabia, for example, the government has actively worked to integrate Bedouins into the national framework. This includes providing housing and education, essentially trading tents for towns. But the Bedouins, ever the pragmatists, have embraced these changes without losing sight of their roots. They've taken to technology like falcons to the sky, using social media to connect with extended families scattered across the globe. You might even catch a Bedouin sheikh posting stories on Instagram about his latest desert expedition, complete with hashtags. However, modernization isn't all tweets and jeeps. Climate change is a far more daunting opponent than any empire or sandstorm. Rising temperatures and dwindling water supplies are threatening the very landscapes that have sustained Bedouin life for millennia. In Jordan, for example, water scarcity has reached critical levels, prompting the government to impose strict water rationing. For a society that once prided itself on its ability to find hidden wells in the desert, this is a bitter pill to swallow. The Bedouins have had to adapt their age-old water conservation techniques, which could make even the most fanatical eco-warrior green with envy. But now, they're also relying on modern solutions like solar-powered desalination plants. It's a marriage of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge technology, a testament to their enduring resilience. And let's not forget the political borders, those pesky lines drawn in the sand by colonial powers who probably couldn't find Mecca with a map. These arbitrary boundaries have disrupted traditional migratory paths, turning the Bedouins from free-roaming nomads into reluctant citizens of modern nation-states. In Israel, for instance, Bedouin communities find themselves in a constant struggle for land rights, often facing displacement. It's a grim reminder that the desert doesn't care for politics, but people are a different story. Yet, in the face of these challenges, the Bedouins have maintained a cultural impact that belies their seemingly simple lifestyle. Their oral traditions continue to inspire poets and musicians worldwide. Take the genre of desert blues, for instance, a musical form that traces its roots to the storytelling traditions of the Bedouins. The rhythm of their poetry and the narrative style have found echoes in modern music, proving that the desert's voice can still be heard in urban jungles. Even fashion isn't immune to Bedouin influence. The keffiyeh, once a practical headscarf to shield against the sun and sand, has become a global style icon. It's worn by everyone from Middle Eastern farmers to Hollywood celebrities, a symbol that transcends cultural boundaries. It's ironic, isn't it? A piece of cloth designed for survival is now a staple in wardrobes worldwide, a testament to the enduring allure of Bedouin culture. So, what can we take away from this whirlwind journey through the sands of history? The Bedouins remind us that adaptability is the ultimate survival skill. They've navigated the rise and fall of empires, danced with the devil of desert storms, and are now facing the challenges of a warming planet and constricting borders. Yet they persist, not just as relics of a bygone era, but as active participants in shaping the world around them. In the end, the Bedouins teach us that history isn't just about the grandiose empires and monumental achievements. It's also about the quiet strength of people who refuse to be swept away by the tides of time. They are a living testament to the power of resilience, showing us that even in the harshest of environments, life finds a way. So next time you're sipping your Starbucks or scrolling through social media, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these desert nomads. They may not have conquered the world, but they've certainly left a lasting imprint on it. And who knows, in a world constantly on the move, the Bedouins might just be the original influencers, reminding us that sometimes the best way forward is to look to the past. The sun's barely peeking over the horizon, and you've already been nudged awake by the cacophony of Athens. It's a city that never really sleeps, probably because it's too busy trying to outdo itself in democracy, philosophy, and occasionally pottery. As you step onto the bustling streets, the air is thick with the sense of olive oil and grilled fish, mingled with the not-so-romantic aroma of the crowded agora. Ah, the agora, ancient Athens' version of Times Square meets a flea market, with a dash of philosophical debate thrown in for good measure. Today, you're heading towards one of Athens' less glamorous yet economically crucial spots, a pottery workshop. You might think, pottery, really? But hold your horses, or chariots in this case. We're talking about an industry that was as vital back then as smartphones are today. Over 30,000 pieces of pottery have been unearthed from the Agora alone, each shard singing a silent song of the past. Pottery was the ancient Greeks' Instagram. Everyone had it, everyone used it, and it told the world who they were. As you weave through the throngs of traders and citizens, take a moment to appreciate the economic gears turning around you. Pottery wasn't just for storing your leftover souvlaki. It was a cornerstone of trade. Those amphorae you see, those tall, two-handled jars with pointed bases, were the ancient Mediterranean's answer to Amazon Prime. They shipped olive oil and wine across the sea with the efficiency that would make Bezos blush. If you were a trader in need of distributing your goods, amphorae were your go-to. They were the barcode of the ancient world, each one marked with stamps and graffiti that told tales of its origin and contents. But why all the fuss over clay? Well, pottery was durable, it was cheap, and it was everywhere. In a society that didn't boast the luxury of plastic or metal mass production, pottery was the everyman's tool. Let's not forget the aesthetic aspect. These pieces were often adorned with intricate designs and scenes that could make modern art critics nod in approval. And here's the kicker. While we're impressed by the artistry, the ancient Greeks were more concerned with the function. It was all about keeping the wine from spilling and the olive oil fresh during those long Mediterranean voyages. Now, before you romanticize the life of a potter as some idyllic artisan existence, let's debunk that myth. Pottery making was grueling work. It was hot, sweaty, and dirty. On a good day, you were caked in clay from head to toe. On a bad day, you were also trying to dodge the kiln's intense heat. This wasn't a hobby. It was a livelihood, one that demanded skill and an intimate understanding of the materials. You didn't just slap some clay on a wheel and hope for the best. It was a process of trial and error, where a single misstep could turn hours of work into a pile of broken shards. Entering the workshop, you're greeted by the symphony of spinning wheels and the chatter of artisans, each focused on their craft. You observe as they deftly mold the clay, their hands moving with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of a dancer. It's a dance against time and elements, relying on the perfect blend of water, clay, and fire. Here, you see the economic significance of pottery come to life. Each piece is a potential paycheck, a ticket to trade routes that crisscross the Mediterranean like a spider's web. So, as you soak in the vibrant chaos of Athens, remember that the humble pottery workshop is more than just a dusty corner of the city. It's a hub of economic activity, a testament to human ingenuity, and a reminder that sometimes the most mundane objects carry the weight of history. And as the sun climbs higher in the sky, you're just getting started on this ancient Greek adventure. And so, the bustling hive of the pottery workshop lays its secrets bare. Stepping inside, you're immediately struck by the organized chaos, an ancient startup in full swing. Forget the romanticized notion of solitary artists toiling away in serene isolation. This is a full-blown production line, a veritable Silicon Valley of antiquity. Each potter here is a cog in a well-oiled machine, crunching out amphorae and craters with the efficiency of an assembly line. Let's break it down. First, you've got the wheel throwers. These folks are the rock stars of the pottery world, the coders riding the perfect algorithm in clay. Their hands move with a deftness that's almost hypnotic, shaping vessel after vessel with a precision that will put your favorite barista's latte art to shame. These potters are the ones who take the raw clay, probably sourced from the island of Milos, known for its fine, red earth, and turn it into something resembling a pot. This is no small feat, considering that Milos is about 120 miles from Athens. That's a considerable journey in ancient terms, requiring a small fleet of ships just to keep the pottery wheels spinning. Next, we have the decorators. Think of them as the front-end designers, turning the plain into the picturesque. They're tasked with painting intricate designs, often scenes from mythology or daily Athenian life, using a special slip, a liquid clay mixture. It's a job that demands an eye for detail and a steady hand, and every stroke is a potential future Instagram post, if you will. The irony. While today we swoon over their artistry, these artisans were likely more concerned with churning out volume than creating a masterpiece, a reality check that art was as much about commerce as creativity. Now, let's not forget the kiln masters. These are the back-end developers of the operation, the unsung heroes who control the fire and heat, the vital elements that transform clay into pottery. The kiln is an ancient marvel of engineering, reaching temperatures upwards of 1,000 degrees Celsius. A single miscalculation, and you could kiss an entire batch goodbye, reduced to nothing more than a pile of useless shards. It's high-stakes poker, with your livelihood on the line. Speaking of stakes, let's talk economics. Producing pottery wasn't cheap. The cost wasn't just in the materials or the labor, but in the logistical gymnastics required to get the finished product to market. Consider this. Shipping an amphora from Athens to, say, Syracuse in Sicily could take weeks, and that's assuming fair weather and no pirate interruptions. Each piece had to be worth the investment, both in time and resources, and the pressure to meet demand was relentless. An amphora might sell for a few drachmas, which in today's terms could be likened to the price of a designer coffee. But when you're trading hundreds at a time, it adds up fast. Yet, even in the face of these pressures, there's a strange romanticism to the whole enterprise. These potters were creators of culture, their work a testament to the daily lives and aspirations of an ancient society. In a way, they were the original influencers, shaping not just clay but cultural narratives. Their creations were the tweets of their time, messages in a bottle sent across the Mediterranean. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The reality was often harsh. Potters worked long hours in less than ideal conditions. The heat was oppressive, the work physically demanding, and the constant threat of economic ruin hung over them like a dark cloud. It was a grind, plain and simple. Yet, out of this crucible of sweat and clay emerged objects that would stand the test of time, each piece a silent witness to the life and times of ancient Greece. So, as we leave the workshop, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for these ancient artisans. They were entrepreneurs and artists, laborers and visionaries. In their hands, the mundane became the magnificent, and the ordinary was elevated to art. And while they might not have had the luxury of modern conveniences, their legacy endures, etched in the pottery shards that continue to tell their story. As you step back into the sunlit streets of Athens, remember that this isn't just an ancient tale. It's a reminder of the enduring power of human creativity and the relentless pursuit of progress. Just as you step back into the sunlit streets of Athens, the echoes of the pottery workshop still ringing in your ears, it's time to dive deeper into the nitty-gritty of ancient pottery making. Let's break down the alchemy of transforming humble clay into vessels that could hold both olive oil and the secrets of an entire civilization. First off, the clay itself. Not all clays are created equal. The Greeks didn't just scoop up any old dirt from their backyard. Oh no, they were more discerning than a hipster at a single-origin coffee bar. The finest clay came from specific regions, like the island of Milos, as we mentioned before. But here's the kicker. The clay wasn't just plopped on a wheel and spun into oblivion. It needed to be carefully mixed with water to form a malleable paste, a process that required patience and precision. Too much water, and the clay would slump like a wet noodle. Too little, and you'd be trying to shape a brick. This mix was the base of all Greek pottery, the foundation upon which every amphora and crater was built. Once the clay was ready, it was time for the wheel, that ancient precursor to modern machinery. The potter's wheel was the stage for a dance as precise as any professional choreography, with the potter's hands gliding over the clay like a DJ spinning records. And while it might sound poetic, this was a process fraught with potential disaster. One false move and your carefully crafted urn could end up as a lopsided monstrosity. Want to know a wild fact? The average potter could shape a simple vessel in under 10 minutes. That's the kind of efficiency that would make even the most seasoned barista jealous. Now, let's talk about the science of firing, because yes, there's some serious science going on here. The kiln, that fiery beast, was both a potter's best friend and worst enemy. It's the final test, where the clay meets its fate. The kiln had to reach temperatures of around 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to turn the clay into something as hard and durable as stone. But there's a catch. The firing process was a delicate dance of temperature changes. It started with an oxidizing phase, which gave the pottery its red color. Then, a reducing phase turned the atmosphere black, allowing for those iconic black figure designs. Finally, another oxidizing phase set everything in place. Mess up any of these stages, and you'd have a batch of parts that looked more like a modern art installation gone wrong. Speaking of art, let's pivot to the decoration process. Painting ancient pottery wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about storytelling. Each piece told a tale, whether it was a scene from a famous myth or a snapshot of daily life. The artists, often anonymous, wielded brushes with the skill of a surgeon and the flair of a street artist. They used a slip, a mixture of water and clay, to paint their designs. The slip turned black during the firing process, creating that distinctive contrast with the red clay. And while we might marvel at their craftsmanship today, these artisans were more like factory workers than lone geniuses. They were churning out pieces for mass consumption, not crafting bespoke masterpieces for high-end collectors. Now, let's not forget the economic context. Pottery was big business, a cornerstone of Greek trade. Each amphora wasn't just a vessel, it was a commodity, a product with a value determined by the market. A single amphora of olive oil might sell for several drachmas, a tidy sum that could feed a family for days. And while we might romanticize the life of a potter today, let's remember that this was hard, often thankless work. It was a job that required not only skill, but also stamina and a fair amount of luck. The potters of ancient Greece were the entrepreneurs of their time, hustling to meet demand and keep their kilns burning. So, as we continue this journey through the world of ancient Greek pottery, let's keep in mind the dual nature of this craft. On one hand, it was an art form, a means of cultural expression that captured the imaginations of people across the Mediterranean. On the other, it was a business, a practical enterprise driven by the economic realities of the time. And while the parts themselves may have been silent, they spoke volumes about the society that created them, a society that valued both beauty and utility, tradition and innovation. As we wrap up this part of our exploration, let's pause to appreciate the legacy these potters left behind. Their work was a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of ancient Greece, a civilization that laid the groundwork for much of what we take for granted today. From the clay pits of Milos to the bustling markets of Athens, the story of Greek pottery is a story of human endeavor, a reminder that even the most mundane objects can hold the weight of history. And as we move forward, there's still more to uncover, more secrets to unearth about this fascinating chapter of the ancient world. And as the dust settles from our whirlwind tour of the potter's workshop, it's time to pause, take a breather, and perhaps grab a bite. After all, even ancient potters had to eat. Picture yourself seated on a low stool, a simple wooden table in front of you, with the midday sun casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Athens. Your meal, probably some bread, olives, maybe a slab of cheese if you're splurging today. Not exactly a Michelin star affair, but hey, sustenance is sustenance. Now, as you munch on that crusty loaf, let's chew over a different topic, the social status of potters. You might think that being at the heart of such a crucial industry would earn these artisans a place of honor in society. Right. Alas, in the grand social hierarchy of ancient Greece, potters were the unsung heroes, often living on the fringes of respectability, much like today's gig economy workers. They were essential yet invisible, the backbone of trade and daily life, yet rarely the talk of the town. Why the disconnect? Well, for starters, Greece was a society that placed philosophers and warriors on pedestals, while craftsmen were often relegated to the background. Sure, Socrates and his ilk might have debated the finer points of ethics over a finely crafted kylix, but you can bet the potter who made it didn't get an invite to those highbrow discussions. It's a bit like how we marvel at a stunning iPhone design while forgetting the folks in the factory who actually put it together. Despite their crucial role, potters weren't exactly dining with the elite. They occupied a status somewhere below the merchants, but above the slaves, a kind of ancient middle class that was vital yet undervalued. This isn't to say they didn't hold any power. Their influence was subtle, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Imagine a world where every amphora you crafted could end up in the hands of a powerful statesman, filled with wine at a symposium where political futures were decided. Potters were the conduits of culture and commerce, even if they weren't the stars of the show. It's tempting to romanticize their lives as a blend of creativity and commerce, where every part was a canvas, and every kiln firing a chance to create something extraordinary. And while there's truth in that, the reality was often more gritty than glorious. Pottery was hard, dirty work. It was long hours spent in cramped, sweltering workshops, where the air was thick with clay dust, and the heat from the kilns made every day feel like a battle against the elements. It was a life of calloused hands and aching backs, hopes that the next batch wouldn't crack and reduce your efforts to rubble. And yet, there was a strange kind of freedom in it. Potters were not bound to the whims of a single master. They were entrepreneurs, hustling to make a living, bartering and trading their wares at the agora. They could move between workshops, seeking better pay or conditions, a flexibility that many envy even today. They were part of a broader economic web, their products reaching across the Mediterranean, helping to spread not just goods but ideas and culture. Let's not forget their artistic legacy, either. Potters were the original storytellers, capturing the myths and legends of their time in clay. Each vessel was a narrative, a way to communicate tales of gods and heroes, of battles and everyday life, to people who might never read a scroll or attend a play. In doing so, it wielded a quiet influence over the art and politics of their world, a fact that might surprise those who only see them as humble craftsmen. So, as you finish your midday meal and brush the crumbs from your tunic, remember the potters of ancient Greece. They were the quiet creators, shaping the vessels that carried not just oil and wine, but the very essence of their civilization. And while their names might not echo through history alongside the great philosophers or generals, their legacy endures in the shards of pottery that still speak to us across the ages. These artisans remind us that sometimes the most enduring marks are left not by the loudest voices, but by the steady hands that shape the world in silence. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, casting the city in a golden light, you prepare to return to the workshop. But before you do, let's consider the larger picture, how these potters fit into the grand tapestry of ancient Greek society. While they might not have been at the top of the social ladder, their work was indispensable, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. They were the silent partners in the spread of Hellenistic culture, their creations accompanying trade routes that stretched as far as Egypt and beyond. In a world where politics was as volatile as the Mediterranean seas, potters were the steady hands behind the scenes, their work a constant in an ever-changing landscape. Their amphorae and craters were the silent witnesses to history, present at every feast and every gathering, a reminder that even the most ordinary objects can hold extraordinary stories. So, as you step back into the workshop, ready to witness the next stage of this ancient craft, remember that the world of the potter is one of contrasts. It's a place where art meets industry, where the mundane meets the magnificent, and where the stories of a civilization are etched into every curve and line. And as we continue to explore this fascinating world, there's still much more to uncover about the lives of these remarkable artisans and the legacy they left behind. Stay tuned, because this journey is far from over. As the shadows lengthen over the bustling city of Athens, we find ourselves reflecting on the legacy of Greek pottery. It's a bit like contemplating a vintage vinyl collection. You can appreciate its aesthetic, but its real value lies in the stories it tells. And boy, do these shards of clay have stories to tell. Each piece is like a time capsule, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires, to everyday dramas and epic myths. Now, let's dig into why pottery is such an archaeological jackpot. You see, pottery shards, or sherds, if you're feeling fancy, are the bread and butter of archaeological digs. Unlike papyrus scrolls that crumble at the hint of a breeze, or wood that's been munched away by termites, pottery stands the test of time like a stubborn old oak. It's durable, often beautifully decorated, and best of all, it's everywhere. Archaeologists have unearthed over 30,000 pieces from the agora alone, each one a piece of the puzzle that is ancient Greek life. Imagine finding a single shard of a kylix, a shallow drinking cup, etched with a scene of revelry. It isn't just a piece of broken crockery. It's a snapshot of a symposium, those infamous intellectual drinking parties where Socrates might have debated the finer points of existence. That shard tells you about the social habits of the Greeks, their love for wine, and their penchant for philosophical banter. And that's just one piece. When you multiply that by the thousands of shards found across the Mediterranean, you start piecing together a vivid picture of a civilization that has shaped much of Western culture. Let's not kid ourselves, though. As romantic as it is to think of pottery as ancient storytellers, the reality was often less glamorous. The so-called golden age of Greek pottery wasn't all sunshine and muses. While it's true that the period from around 600 to 300 BCE was a high point in artistic achievement, it was also a time of intense competition and economic pressure. Potters weren't leisurely artists dabbling in creativity. They were business people hustling to make a drachma. They churned out amphorae and craters with the speed and precision of a well-oiled machine. The myth of the solitary genius potter, toiling away in serene isolation. Pure fantasy. Workshops were bustling, noisy places, more akin to a modern-day factory than an artist's studio. And the potters themselves, they were more akin to gig workers than revered artisans. They faced the constant pressure of market demand, the ever-present threat of a botched firing, and the need to innovate just to stay afloat. It was a grind, plain and simple, but one that produced works of lasting significance. Speaking of significance, let's talk about the enduring impact of Greek pottery on the world of art and history. These pieces didn't just serve practical purposes. They were canvases for storytelling, imbued with cultural significance. The black figure and red figure techniques, where artists painted scenes that would turn black or stay red after firing, were as much about aesthetics as they were about communication. They depicted everything from epic battles and divine interventions to mundane market scenes, offering a glimpse into both the extraordinary and the ordinary lives of the Greeks. And here's a fun fact. The influence of Greek pottery didn't stop in ancient times. It carried forward, inspiring Renaissance artists and even modern design. The clean lines, balanced proportions, and intricate designs of Greek pottery have informed everything from neoclassical architecture to contemporary ceramics. It's the original trendsetter, a testament to the timeless nature of its appeal. But let's not sugarcoat it. While we might admire the artistry and technique, the potters themselves often didn't share in the glory. They were the unsung heroes, their names lost to history even as their work endured. It's a reminder that while art can be immortal, the artist sometimes isn't. Yet, there's a certain poetic justice in that. These potters, through their anonymous labor, contributed to a legacy that transcends time, influencing cultures and civilizations long after their own had faded. As the evening draws to a close, we're left with the enduring lessons from this ancient craft. Greek pottery reminds us of the power of creativity and the human spirit. It was born out of necessity, driven by economic and social forces, and yet it became a vehicle for expression and innovation. It's a testament to the idea that even in the most challenging circumstances, art can flourish, and that the mundane can be transformed into the magnificent. In the end, the story of Greek pottery is one of legacy. It's about how a simple craft, born out of the earth and shaped by human hands, can echo through the ages. These parts and shards, these silent witnesses, remind us of our shared humanity, of the stories we tell and the lives we lead. They're a bridge to the past, a reminder that while civilizations may rise and fall, the art they leave behind endures, whispering their secrets to anyone willing to listen. And as we stand on the shoulders of these ancient giants, we're reminded that the lessons of history are not just found in the grandiose, but in the everyday objects that carry the weight of human experience. In the late 19th century, humanity was gripped by an obsession with the unknown, a thrilling dance with the edges of the earth. This was an era when men were men, and their mustaches were even more so. It was a time of audacious explorers who, without GPS or a reliable source of warmth, decided that the Arctic was the perfect destination for a summer getaway. Enter Andrée, a Swedish engineer with a flair for the dramatic and an idea that was as bold as it was balloon-like, to float across the Arctic Circle in a hydrogen balloon. Yes, you heard that right. Forget your Instagram hot air balloon ride over Cappadocia. Andrée was setting his sights on the Arctic tundra, where the phrase chilling out takes on a whole new meaning. Now, let's get one thing straight. The 1890 weren't exactly the golden age of balloon technology. Hydrogen balloons had a nasty habit of leaking, exploding, or just plain refusing to cooperate with their ambitious pilots. Yet, the allure of exploration was irresistible, much like a moth to a particularly icy flame. Andrée's plan wasn't just about showing off his steely resolve. It was about pushing the boundaries of what technology could achieve. In an age when the concept of an electric toothbrush was pure science fiction, Andrée was dreaming big. This dream was fueled by a cultural zeitgeist that was part Jules Verne, part national pride, and part sheer lunacy. The world was buzzing with the possibilities of technological advancement. The Industrial Revolution had already turned coal and steam into household names, and now the air itself was the next frontier. Idea of flying, of defying gravity and laughing in the face of nature's laws, was intoxicating. People wanted to believe that the sky was not the limit, but just the beginning. In this atmosphere of innovation and adventure, Andrée's proposition was met with excitement rather than skepticism. The plan was to launch from Svalbard, an archipelago known for its polar bears and general disdain for human survival, and glide over the North Pole to either Alaska or Canada. It was a journey of roughly 100 miles, assuming everything went according to plan. Spoiler alert, in exploration, things rarely go according to plan. Andrée wasn't a lone wolf howling into the Arctic wind. He had the backing of some serious Swedish clout. King Oscar Roman II, a monarch who clearly enjoyed a bit of vicarious adventure, threw his royal support behind the endeavor. And then there was Alfred Nobel, the man who invented dynamite and decided to balance his karmic scales by establishing the Nobel Prizes. Nobel, who knew a thing or two about explosive situations, was intrigued by Andrée's daring scheme and decided to fund it. This was crowdfunding, 19th century style, only instead of Kickstarter, it was more like kickstart your demise. The financial support wasn't just about money. It was a vote of confidence, a nod to the audacity of human spirit. It was a time when nations were carving up the globe like a holiday turkey, and Sweden didn't want to be left nibbling on the scraps. An Arctic expedition was a statement, a way to plant a flag in the frozen north and say, hey, we exist too, and we're not afraid of a little frostbite. The technological limitations of the period were, to put it mildly, significant. Hydrogen balloons, while cutting edge, were notoriously difficult to control. Steering was more of a suggestion than a skill, and the weather could be an unpredictable tyrant. Yet Andrée's vision was unwavering. It was a gamble of epic proportions, the kind that makes you question the sanity of everyone involved. But that's the thing about history's adventurers. They're not deterred by the odds, they're fueled by them. Andrée's ambition was like a fever dream, the kind you wake up from and think, what was I thinking? Yet, it was precisely this kind of audacity that defined the age. The world was shrinking, and maps were filling in their blank spaces. The Arctic was one of the last great unknowns, a place where legends and reality collided in a swirl of snow and ice. Andrée wasn't just reaching for the skies. He was grabbing hold of the collective imagination of a world eager for heroes and stories of triumph against nature's harshest elements. So, as Andrée prepared for his journey, the world watched with bated breath. Would he succeed in his lofty endeavor, or would the Arctic claim yet another dreamer? The stakes were high, the risks even higher, but the potential for glory was irresistible. In the end, it was more than just a balloon flight. It was a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of discovery, wrapped in a hydrogen-filled package ready to take on the Arctic winds. And so, the world watched with bated breath as Andrée and his team began the arduous task of preparing for their icy odyssey. Let's dive deep into the construction of their chariot of the skies, the balloon christened Ernan, or the Eagle. It sounds majestic, right? As if this balloon was going to glide over the Arctic like it owned the place. But before you start picturing a graceful swan of the skies, let's talk about the reality of this hydrogen-filled behemoth. Ernan was no ordinary balloon. This was a massive, 20-meter diameter beast crafted from 3 layers of silk, which might sound like a fancy wedding dress. But in balloon terms, it was more like an over-ambitious patchwork quilt. The whole thing was coated in varnish to make it somewhat less permeable to hydrogen, a gas known for its delightful tendency to escape at the slightest provocation. The idea was to keep the balloon inflated long enough to drift across the Arctic. But like trying to keep a toddler from spilling juice, it was a task of epic proportions. Now, when it came to logistics, think of it as trying to plan a camping trip to the moon. Everything had to be transported to Svalbard, a place that made Antarctica look like a winter wonderland. The balloon itself was packed into wooden crates and shipped off from Sweden. The cost of this adventure, a cool 130 0.000 krona, which, for comparison, was like burning through the GDP of a small country back in the day. And let's not forget about the hydrogen. This wasn't the kind of gas you could just pick up at the local hardware store. Generating hydrogen involved a whole chemistry set, complete with sulfuric acid and iron filings, which, let's face it, sounds more like a villain's lab than an explorer's toolkit. But as with any great adventure, it wasn't just about the gear. Enter the fearless trio, Andrée, Nils Strindberg, and Nut Frinkle. Picture them as the original band of misfits, each bringing their own brand of expertise and quirks to the table. Andrée, the mastermind and eternal optimist, had a penchant for seeing the glass half full, even when it was clearly leaking. Nils Strindberg was the young whiz kid with a passion for photography, eager to capture the breathtaking vistas of the Arctic tundra, assuming they made it that far. Then there was Nut Frinkle, the engineer, a man of few words but many skills, who was probably the most practical of the bunch. This was not so much a crack team as it was a merry band of dreamers, each one balancing precariously on the edge of audacity and naivety. Their dynamic was a fascinating mix of camaraderie and chaos. You might imagine them as the three musketeers of the polar regions, but reality painted a slightly less romantic picture. The preparation was fraught with challenges that would test even the most seasoned explorers. They had to contend with the unpredictable weather, the daunting logistics, and the ever-present risk of a catastrophic hydrogen mishap. It was like trying to host a barbecue in a hurricane, only the stakes were a tad higher, and the grill was a giant balloon. The decision-making process behind this expedition was, to put it mildly, a cocktail of optimism and questionable judgment. Andrée had this unshakable belief in the power of technology and human ingenuity, which, while admirable, often led to some head-scratching choices. For instance, they decided to forego any real steering mechanism for the balloon, relying instead on ropes that were supposed to drag along the ice to provide some semblance of control. If you're thinking this sounds about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a monsoon, you're not far off. Yet, despite these glaring gaps in practicality, the allure of exploration was a powerful motivator. The promise of glory and the thrill of the unknown were enough to keep the team focused, even as their plans seemed to unravel faster than a cheap sweater. The Arctic was calling, and they were ready to answer, armed with nothing but their wits, a balloon full of hydrogen, and a dream as vast as the icy expanse they were about to cross. As they prepared to launch, one couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. This was not just an expedition. It was a testament to the human spirit's relentless pursuit of knowledge and adventure, no matter how perilous the journey. And while the world watched and wondered, Andrée and his crew were poised on the brink of history, ready to take flight into the unknown. The stakes were sky high, the risks even higher, but the potential for glory was irresistible. In the end, it was more than just a balloon flight. It was a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of discovery, wrapped in a hydrogen-filled package ready to take on the Arctic winds. The stage was set, the players were ready, and the world held its breath for what was sure to be a journey unlike any other. And so, with a collective breath held across the globe, the day of reckoning arrived. July 11, 1897. This wasn't just any old Sunday stroll across the Arctic. It was the moment when Andrée's grandiose vision would either soar or sink. The crowd in Svalbard gathered with a mix of anticipation and trepidation, the kind of vibe you'd find at a high-stakes poker game where everyone's betting the farm. The balloon, Urnen, loomed large, a silken leviathan waiting to devour the skies, or at least make a respectable attempt. As the ropes were cut and Urnen began its ascent, the mood was electric. Cheers erupted, hats were thrown into the air, and somewhere a dog probably barked in confusion. It was a scene straight out of a Jules Verne novel, or at least it would have been had Verne ever considered the practicalities of high-altitude polar travel. The balloon rose majestically, and for a brief, shining moment, everything seemed possible. The Arctic lay ahead, an icy canvas waiting for Andrée and his crew to paint their legacy. But let's get real for a second. This was no magic carpet ride. Almost immediately, the elements began to conspire against our intrepid explorers. The balloon was soon at the mercy of the winds, and control was a fanciful notion best left to bedtime stories. According to Strindberg's diary, which reads like a masterclass in understatement, they realized that steering was going to be difficult, a bit like trying to navigate a shopping cart with a wonky wheel through a crowded supermarket. And then there were the leaks. Oh, the leaks. Hydrogen, as it turns out, has a nasty habit of not staying put, especially when your balloon is essentially a giant sieve. The crew quickly discovered their airborne chariot was losing gas faster than a deflating party balloon. Strindberg, ever the chronicler of chaos, noted their incessant hissing as they scrambled to plug the gaps. It was a bit like trying to patch a sinking ship with band-aids, but with the added thrill of being thousands of feet above a frozen wasteland. As if that wasn't enough to keep them on their toes, Mother Nature decided to throw in a curveball. Ice. Lots of it. The balloon began to collect ice faster than a kid's soccer team in a snowstorm. The added weight threatened to drag them down, and suddenly their majestic flight was more like a slow-motion nosedive. The crew frantically chipped away at the ice, a task Strindberg described as tedious, which is explorer speak for we're in deep trouble. Navigational control, which was always more of an art than a science in those days, quickly became an exercise in futility. Andrée and his team had planned to use long ropes to drag along the ice, providing some semblance of steering. Instead, they found themselves at the mercy of the wind, which, as luck would have it, seemed determined to send them in every direction except the one they wanted. It was like trying to walk a dog that's just spotted a squirrel, a losing battle. Despite the chaos unraveling around them, there was a certain grim humor to be found in the situation. Here were 3 men, dangling over the Arctic in a rapidly deflating balloon, yet they pressed on with a stubborn resolve that would have made even the most determined explorers raise an eyebrow. Strindberg's diary entries reveal a mix of anxiety and absurdity, capturing moments of levity even as they faced the very real threat of becoming human popsicles. It's easy to romanticize this adventure, to paint it as a noble quest against all odds. And sure, there's something undeniably heroic about it. But the reality was far less glamorous. This was an expedition born out of equal parts ambition and naivety, a testament to the audacity of human spirit and the folly that often accompanies it. As Ernan drifted further into the Arctic abyss, it became increasingly clear that the dream of gliding effortlessly over the North Pole was just that, a dream. The economic and political context of the time only added to the irony. Here was Andrée, a man with financial backing from some of Sweden's most illustrious patrons, yet no amount of money could buy favorable winds or a leak-proof balloon. The expedition was a microcosm of the era's blind faith in technology, a belief that human ingenuity could conquer even the harshest of landscapes. But as Andrée's team soon discovered, nature has a way of reminding us who's really in charge. Despite the mounting challenges, the crew pressed on, buoyed by a mix of determination and the sheer thrill of adventure. They were explorers in the truest sense, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. And while their journey was fraught with peril, it was also a reminder of the indomitable human spirit, a spirit that refuses to be tamed, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As Ernan continued its unpredictable journey across the Arctic skies, the world watched with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Would they succeed in their quest, or would the Arctic claim yet another dreamer? The stakes were high, the risks even higher, but the allure of discovery was irresistible. And so, with a balloon full of hydrogen and a heart full of hope, Andrée and his crew pressed on into the unknown, their fate as uncertain as the winds that carried them. Andrée and his crew, still clinging to their dream like a lifeline, found themselves confronting a new, bone-chilling reality as Ernan made its less-than-graceful descent onto the Arctic pack ice on July 14, 1897. The balloon had finally given up the ghost, settling onto the frozen sea with all the elegance of a lead balloon. This was not quite the triumphant arrival they'd envisioned, more crash landing than grand finale. With their airborne aspirations quite literally grounded, the crew's mission took a sharp turn from exploration to survival. But let's not sugarcoat it. They were stranded in the Arctic, a place that makes a Siberian winter look like a beach holiday. This was a bleak, desolate landscape, where the only thing colder than the ice was the realization that their supplies were dwindling faster than a snowman in spring. They were about 300 miles from their intended destination, and with no convenient corner store in sight, improvisation became the name of the game. Cue the makeshift survival tactics. First on the agenda was the construction of a shelter, a necessity when you're faced with polar bears that, contrary to their cuddly image, aren't exactly keen on sharing their turf with uninvited guests. The crew turned their balloon basket into a cozy, albeit cramped, home. Using bits of canvas and wood from the balloon, they cobbled together a tent. Sure, it wasn't exactly the Ritz, but when the alternative is hypothermia, you take what you can get. Now, in the Arctic, the concept of home cooking takes on a whole new meaning. With limited supplies and an appetite that only the threat of starvation can inspire, the menu was less gourmet and more whatever's left in the tin. Their diet consisted mainly of pemmican, a delightful concoction of dried meat and fat, and chocolate, which sounds like the worst trail mix ever but was surprisingly high in calories. Still, it wasn't long before they were eyeing the food supply with growing concern, aware that their rations were dwindling quicker than a New Year's resolution. Amidst this icy purgatory, the trio faced not just physical challenges, but also the psychological strain of isolation. Morale was like the Arctic sun during winter, rarely seen and quick to vanish. Andrée, ever the optimist, tried to keep spirits up with talk of rescue and survival. But optimism can only take you so far when you're knee-deep in snow, with no end in sight. Leadership dynamics began to fray as the reality of their predicament set in. Strindberg's diary entries reveal a struggle to maintain hope, a delicate dance between despair and determination as they faced the fact that rescue was more wishful thinking than imminent reality. Ironically, it was the very isolation that served as a double-edged sword, both a source of despair and a catalyst for camaraderie. The men developed a dark humor, a coping mechanism as essential as their tinned food. They joked about their frozen beards and the absurdity of it all, finding a grim humor in the thought that they'd set out to conquer the Arctic, only to become reluctant residents. It was this levity that kept them going, a reminder that sometimes the only way to get through a dire situation is to laugh in its face. The trek southward was nothing short of Herculean. Armed with sledges fashioned from parts of their balloon and a hope as fragile as the ice beneath their feet, they began the long, treacherous journey. Each step was a battle against the elements, the biting wind cutting through their clothing like 1,000 tiny daggers. They trudged for hours each day, the landscape a monotonous expanse of white that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. But let's not romanticize this. This wasn't a noble march towards salvation. It was a desperate shuffle, one foot in front of the other, driven by the primal urge to survive. They navigated by the stars, and the sun when it deigned to appear, their compasses more like wishful thinking than reliable instruments. The Arctic was a place where nature played by its own rules, indifferent to human suffering. The economic context of this ordeal was a cruel irony. Here they were, funded by the creme de la creme of Swedish society, yet no amount of money could buy them warmth, food, or a way home. It was a stark reminder that in the grand game of survival, currency is measured not in krona, but in calories and degrees Celsius. The political ambitions that had fueled their journey were now as distant as the North Star, leaving them with nothing but the harsh reality of their situation. Throughout this grim odyssey, there was a lingering hope, albeit faint, that rescue might come. They left messages in cairns and on floating ice, like desperate messages in bottles cast into a vast, frozen sea. But the Arctic was vast and unforgiving, and the likelihood of their signals reaching any potential savior was as slim as their chances of finding a burger joint in the tundra. As they trudged on, the romantic notions of adventure that had once filled their minds were replaced by an unyielding focus on survival. This was no longer about glory or exploration. It was about making it to the next day, the next meal, the next mile. The Arctic had stripped away the veneer of heroism, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth of human endurance. And yet, even as hope dwindled and the cold gnawed at their resolve, there was something profoundly human in their struggle. It was a testament to the tenacity of the human spirit, a refusal to succumb even when the odds were stacked higher than the snowdrifts around them. The Arctic may have been a harsh mistress, but it also revealed the depths of human resilience, a stark contrast to the romanticized tales of conquest and adventure. As Andrée and his companions continued their desperate trek, the world beyond remained oblivious, caught up in its own affairs. Their journey was a microcosm of the era's blind faith in progress. a reminder that no matter how advanced technology becomes, nature holds the ultimate trump card. The balloon flight had been an audacious gamble, and now, as they forged a path through the ice, they were paying the price for their ambition. But even amidst the bleakness, there was a flicker of hope, not just for survival, but for the possibility that their story would serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's unforgiving might. As they pressed on, step by arduous step, they carried with them a lesson that would resonate long after the Arctic winds had swept away their footprints. Their fate remained uncertain, their journey a testament to the indomitable human spirit. And as they continued onward, into the icy unknown, one thing was clear. The Arctic had not claimed them yet. The story was far from over, and the next chapter was waiting to be written in the snow. And so, as Andrée and his companions continued their icy trek, the Arctic's unyielding grip on their brittle hopes became a test of human endurance and folly. Fast forward to 1930, when a team of Norwegian seal hunters stumbled upon the remains of the ill-fated expedition on White Island, a discovery that would reignite interest in their tragic journey. It was like finding a time capsule of ambition and misadventure, frozen in time and ice. The remains revealed a grim tableau of the crew's final days, offering tantalizing clues, yet leaving an avalanche of questions unanswered. Among the artifacts were diaries, photographs, and even a well-preserved balloon fabric, a poignant reminder of dreams that never took flight. The world, ever the sucker for a good story, was captivated. Here was a narrative that combined the drama of survival with the mystery of an unsolved fate. Newspapers splashed the tale across their pages, and the public devoured it with the same morbid curiosity one reserves for reality TV train wrecks. But what was it about this particular expedition that captured the imagination? Perhaps it was the potent mix of tragedy, adventure, and the sheer audacity of it all. In Sweden, André's foolhardy quest was quickly romanticized. He was cast in the mold of a national hero, a pioneer who dared to challenge the unknown. The harsh realities of their ordeal were glossed over, replaced by a narrative that celebrated bravery over blunder. In a way, it was a classic case of history being written by the survivors, or, in this case, their admirers. Yet, beneath the romantic veneer lay a cautionary tale about the limits of human ambition. André's expedition was as much about the hubris of an age as it was about exploration. Here was a man who placed unwavering faith in technology, a belief that human ingenuity could bend nature to its will. It was a mindset all too familiar in an era where the Industrial Revolution had fueled unprecedented progress. But as the remains on White Island attested, nature has a way of reminding us of our place in the grand scheme of things. The 1930 discovery also sparked a wave of mythologizing. Books were written, films were made, and André's story became woven into the fabric of Swedish culture. It was a tale that resonated with the zeitgeist of the 20th century, a period marked by rapid technological advancements and the ever-present tension between progress and peril. André's journey was a microcosm of this dynamic, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge often comes with a hefty price tag. This fascination with exploration and its inherent risks hasn't faded over time. If anything, it's evolved alongside our technological capabilities. Consider the modern equivalent of André's balloon, space exploration. Just as Andrée dared to venture into the Arctic's icy expanse, today we have visionaries like Elon Musk and NASA setting their sights on Mars. The stakes are higher, the technology more advanced, but the underlying drive remains unchanged, a relentless curiosity to explore the unknown, to reach beyond our earthly confines. But let's not kid ourselves. Whether it's the Arctic or the cosmos, the risks are real and the outcomes uncertain. Just as André's crew faced the Arctic's merciless elements, today's space explorers grapple with the vast, uncharted territory of the universe. It's a reminder that while technology can propel us further than ever before, it can't eliminate the inherent dangers of stepping into the unknown. So, what is it about exploration that continues to captivate us, despite its perils? Perhaps it's the allure of discovery, the promise of new frontiers, and the possibility of rewriting the limits of what we know. Or maybe it's the simple, unyielding human spirit that refuses to be tethered by fear. After all, exploration is as much about the journey as it is about the destination, a testament to our insatiable desire to push boundaries and challenge the status quo. As we reflect on André's legacy, it's clear that his expedition was more than a historical footnote. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal dance with ambition and adversity. It serves as both a tribute to the explorers who dare to dream and a sobering reminder of the costs that often accompany such dreams. In the end, André's story is a poignant reminder that while the path of exploration is fraught with risk, it's also paved with the potential for remarkable discoveries. And in those discoveries, we find the very essence of what it means to be human, curious, daring, and forever reaching for the stars. You spring out of your straw-stuffed mattress, already feeling the future weight of the Roman Empire on your shoulders. You're a Roman engineer, after all, one of those unsung heroes who doesn't get the glory like the generals or the emperors. But let's face it, without you, Caesar would probably be stuck in a ditch somewhere, shouting orders at a pile of rubble. The sun's barely up, yet you're already on the move. You've got to make sure the roads are straight, the aqueducts flow smoothly, and the bridges don't collapse under the weight of an army. Your tools, far from the laser levels and smartphones of today, you're armed with a groma and the trustworthy plumb line. Think of them as the iPhones of your day, simple but surprisingly effective. The groma, a cross-shaped device with dangling plumb lines, helps you map out perfectly straight roads. You might not have Google Maps, but you can bet your toga that Roman roads were the envy of the ancient world. Now, let's not romanticize it too much. You weren't exactly sipping espresso while sketching blueprints. Your tools were basic, but your expertise was anything but. Take the plumb line, for example. It's essentially a string with a weight at the end, but in your hands, it's a tool of precision engineering. You've got to know how to use it to ensure everything's aligned perfectly. One wrong move, and you could be responsible for a building that leans more than the Tower of Pisa. Your morning routine is rigorous, to say the least. A breakfast of bread and maybe some olives if you're lucky, then it's off to the construction site. You're not just a pencil pusher. You're in the trenches, literally. The job requires you to be hands-on, whether it's directing slaves and soldiers in the construction of a new road or overseeing the repair of an aqueduct. And don't think for a second that the weather cuts you any slack. Rain or shine, you're out there, because the empire doesn't stop expanding just because of a little drizzle. What's fascinating is how you manage to stay efficient despite the lack of modern conveniences. For instance, Roman engineers were keen on using local materials, reducing the need for long-distance transport of construction goods. Talk about being eco-friendly before it was cool. You knew how to work with what you had, which was essential given the empire's vast stretches. And those roads you built weren't just any roads. They were the arteries of the empire, stretching over 50,000 miles at the height of Rome's power. That's a lot of ground to cover, especially when you're working with a team that might not always speak the same language as you. Speaking of languages, let's not forget the diverse workforce you're managing. From Roman citizens to conquered peoples, your crew is a melting pot of cultures. It's your job to ensure that everyone's on the same page, even if they're speaking different tongues. And in case you're wondering, no, you don't have a nifty app for instant translation. You rely on your wits and a few choice Latin phrases to keep the project moving. Now, we can't talk about Roman engineers without addressing the elephant in the room, slavery. Yes, many of your laborers are slaves, and that's a harsh reality of the time. The romantic image of a harmonious workforce, it's a myth. The truth is, you're balancing efficiency with the harsh realities of an empire built on the backs of the subjugated. You might be the brains behind the operation, but you're keenly aware that without those countless hands, even your genius wouldn't be enough. The myth of the lone genius is just that, a myth. Roman engineering was a team sport, and you were the coach, quarterback, and cheerleader all rolled into one. Your work was crucial, though often overlooked in the grand narratives of Roman conquest. While generals were busy strategizing the next battle, you were the one making sure they could actually get there. Roads, aqueducts, and bridges weren't just infrastructure. They were the lifeblood of a sprawling empire. They connected cities, facilitated trade, and allowed for the rapid movement of legions. And let's not forget the aqueducts. These marvels of engineering were your pride and joy. The aqueducts of Rome were so efficient that they supplied the city with over 300 million gallons of water a day. That's right, a day. This wasn't just about quenching thirst. It was about public baths, sanitation, and even fountains. The very quality of life in Rome was elevated because of these structures. You didn't just build, you improved lives, even if your name didn't make it into the history books. In the grand tapestry of the Roman Empire, you were the weaver, stitching together the fabric of civilization. Sure, the emperors might have gotten all the credit, but without you, they'd be ruling over a kingdom of mud huts and log bridges. So as you grab your groma and prepare to face another day, remember this. You are an essential cog in the mighty machine that is Rome. And while you may not be celebrated in song and story, your legacy is etched into every stone and every mile of road that stretches across the empire. So, as you grab your groma and prepare to face another relentless day of Roman engineering, let's dive into the gritty world of economics, ancient style. Because let's be honest, even back then, nothing greased the wheels of progress like a bit of coin. And for you, the engineer extraordinaire, budgeting wasn't just a task, it was a survival skill. First off, let's talk about stone and concrete, the bread and butter of Roman construction. Sure, the Colosseum looks majestic now, but back in the day, it was a financial headache. Marble wasn't just lying around like seashells on a beach. Quarries were often far from your construction site, and transporting heavy blocks wasn't exactly a walk in the forum. We're talking a logistical nightmare that would make even modern project managers break out in hives. Now, you had to be crafty because stone wasn't cheap. High-quality block of marble could set you back over 100 denarii. To put that in perspective, that's about a month's wages for a Roman soldier. And don't think for a second that you could just swap in a few cheap stones and call it a day. The political brass had eagle eyes for that kind of corner cutting. They wanted their monuments grand, their roads straight, and their aqueducts flowing with pristine water. Speaking of political pressure, it wasn't just about aesthetics. Bigwigs were breathing down your neck to get things done yesterday. Time was of the essence, and in an empire where the next big conquest was always on the horizon, delays were simply not an option. You were constantly walking a tightrope, balancing quality with speed, all while keeping costs from spiraling out of control. But here's where it gets interesting. Roman engineers like you were masters of innovation. You didn't just sit around lamenting the cost of stone. No, you came up with the genius idea of using concrete, a Roman specialty that was miles ahead of its time. This wasn't your garden variety mix. It was a blend of lime mortar, water, sand, and volcanic ash that set like a rock under water. And get this, it was a fraction of the cost of marble. Now that's what I call engineering with flair. Still, even with concrete, you had to play a game of resource management. Transporting materials over vast distances required ingenuity more than muscle. Enter the Roman road network, a brilliant hack in itself. These roads weren't just for marching legions. They were the superhighways of the ancient world, designed to move materials and people efficiently. Thanks to the roads and the clever use of pack animals, you could haul tons of materials across the empire without breaking the bank. But let's not sugarcoat it. Sometimes, pressure to deliver on time and under budget led to some, shall we say, creative solutions. Cutting corners wasn't just a modern phenomenon. It was practically an art form in ancient Rome. Need to save a bit of cash, maybe skip a few quality checks, running behind schedule. Perhaps some shortcuts on the road grading wouldn't hurt. It was a precarious dance, striking a balance between ingenuity and recklessness. And then there were the human costs. Labor was cheap, especially when it involved slaves and prisoners of war, but managing them was no picnic. You had to maintain order and productivity, ensuring that the workforce didn't collapse under the strain or revolt, which would throw your carefully laid plans into chaos. You were part engineer, part diplomat, and sometimes part enforcer. In this high-stakes world, you constantly walked the line between efficiency and catastrophe. Every decision you made could spell the difference between a triumphal arch that stood for millennia and a crumbling wreck that became the butt of jokes at the Senate. It was a world where your reputation was as fragile as the materials you worked with. So, the next time you marvel at the ruins of a once great empire, remember the unsung heroes behind the stones, the engineers who juggled economics, politics, and logistics with a skill that would have made even the most seasoned Wall Street broker break a sweat. Because in the end, the story of Roman engineering is one of relentless innovation in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. And as you stand there, groma in hand, you can't help but appreciate the legacy you've left behind. a legacy etched not just in stone, but in the very fabric of history itself. Now, let's dive into the wild world of ancient environmental challenges, where Roman engineers didn't just survive, they thrived. Picture it. You're standing at the foot of the Alps, staring up at an imposing mountain range that's more stubborn than a mule. But hey, you're a Roman engineer, and mountains, they're just another Tuesday. First, let's talk weather. Those sunny Roman postcards didn't capture the whole story. Imagine trying to build a road while Mother Nature throws a tantrum. Rainstorms could transform your construction site into a mud wrestling pit in minutes. And don't get me started on flash floods, which could sweep away weeks of hard labor faster than you can say Julius Caesar. Roman engineers had to plan for these little mood swings, often building roads with raised embankments and drainage ditches to keep the water from doing a victory lap through their hard work. But wait, there's more. Ever heard of the Roman roads in Britain? These engineers weren't just battling the elements. They were waging war against bogs. Yes, bogs. You know, those muddy, swampy bits of land that swallow boots and dreams alike. When they hit these soggy patches, Roman engineers got creative. They laid down layers of brushwood, clay, and gravel to create a stable surface. Essentially, they invented the ancient precursor to the modern boardwalk. Talk about ingenuity. And then there were the earthquakes. Rome wasn't exactly built on the most stable piece of real estate. With the ground shaking like a Roman bacchanal, engineers had to think on their feet, or rather, on their foundations. Take the city of Pompeii, for instance. Before Vesuvius decided to have its fiery tantrum, the city experienced frequent earthquakes. Roman engineers adapted by constructing buildings with flexibility in mind. They used lighter materials like timber and designed structures with wider bases to better absorb seismic shocks. Think of it as an ancient version of shock absorbers for buildings. Now, let's tackle one of the most enduring myths, that Roman engineers had some kind of mystical powers. Legend has it they could build anything, anywhere, with a wave of their hands. In reality, these supposed feats of engineering magic were the result of sheer grit and clever problem-solving. Take the aqueducts again. Spanning dozens of miles, these structures weren't just about clever water routing. They had to contend with rugged terrains, shifting soils, and ever-changing water levels. When faced with a tricky bit of geography, Roman engineers didn't throw up their hands and call it a day. They built siphons, bridges, and tunnels to keep the water flowing. They were more like water diviners, with a talent for topography than magicians. Consider the Pont du Gard in France, an aqueduct bridge standing 160 feet tall and stretching over 900 feet across the Garden River. This masterpiece wasn't the result of a magic wand. It was a triumph of engineering foresight. The Romans calculated the gradient with such precision that the water flowed smoothly over 31 miles with a drop of just 17 meters. That's less slope than your average backyard. It was all mathematics and hard labor, no hocus-pocus involved. Yet, as much as we admire these feats today, the reality was often messier. Roman engineers didn't always get it right the first time. They had their fair share of collapsed structures and washed-out roads, but they learned from their mistakes, constantly refining their techniques. Failure wasn't the end. It was just another step toward perfection. It's a lesson in perseverance that still resonates today, long after the Roman Empire's decline. And let's not forget the human element, the workers who made these dreams a reality. While myths paint a picture of a harmonious workforce, the truth was more complex. Engineers had to manage not just the terrain, but also the people. Coordinating teams of laborers, some of whom were slaves, was a logistical nightmare. Yet they somehow managed to turn chaos into order, brick by brick. In the grand tapestry of Roman engineering, every road, aqueduct, and building tells a story of adaptation and innovation. They didn't just conquer lands, they conquered nature itself. So, the next time you walk down a street or cross a bridge, take a moment to thank those ancient engineers who faced the elements and emerged victorious. Their legacy is etched not only in stone, but in the very DNA of modern engineering. And as we move forward, let's keep their spirit of innovation alive. Who knows what challenges await in the next chapter of this historical saga? One thing's for sure, whatever it is, it won't be dull. After all, if Roman engineers could tame mountains and redirect rivers, what can't we achieve with a little ingenuity and a lot of determination? Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. So, speaking of challenges, let's pivot to the real gladiatorial arena for Roman engineers, the political and social pressures. You see, while you're busy wrestling with nature and logistics, there's an entirely different beast breathing down your neck, namely, the emperors and the Roman populace. It's one thing to build an aqueduct. It's another to do it while the most powerful man in the world is scrutinizing every brick you lay. First up, let's talk emperors. These guys weren't known for their patience. Imagine being summoned by Emperor Augustus himself, who, by the way, had a penchant for grandiosity that rivaled any modern-day celebrity. Augustus wanted Rome to shine like the center of the universe, which meant you, the engineer, had to keep pulling rabbits out of hats, or rather, aqueducts out of mountains. The stakes, tremendously high. A shardy road or a collapsed bridge could land you in deep trouble, or worse, the Colosseum's latest entertainment feature. But hey, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The emperors knew the power of good PR. If you managed to pull off a feat of engineering that left the crowds in awe, they'd shower you with accolades, sometimes even a statue or two. And let's be real, in a world without Instagram, a statue was the ultimate form of hashtag winning. Though let's not get carried away. These were rare accolades, handed out like golden tickets in a Willy Wonka factory. For most engineers, a job well done meant simply avoiding the wrong end of a lion's roar. Then there's the public. The Roman citizens. Tough crowd, that lot. They expected the streets to be paved with more than just cobblestones. Public baths that ran dry or roads that turned into quagmires during the rainy season could lead to a public outcry. Romans had opinions, and boy, did they love to share them loudly at the forum. You needed to keep them happy, or at least satisfied enough to not start a riot. Let's not forget that these were the same folks who took to the streets when Julius Caesar got a bit too ambitious with his crown ambitions. Now, enter propaganda, stage left. This was Rome, after all, and image was everything. Emperors were keen to use successful engineering projects as propaganda tools, a way to show off not just their wealth and power, but their benevolence. Look at these roads, they'd say, built for the glory of Rome and the comfort of its citizens. Never mind that you had to dodge the odd chariot racing down an alley like a Formula One car. The message was clear. Engineering was a symbol of Rome's greatness, a testament to its divine favor and eternal legacy. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The reality was more complex. Behind the grand facades and polished marble were the risks you took every day. And I'm not just talking about the risk of an aqueduct springing a leak. Building on unstable ground or using subpar materials to save costs were genuine concerns that kept you up at night. Your reputation, much like the structures you built, was on the line. One slip-up and you could find yourself out of a job, or worse. And yet, it was this high-stakes environment that drove innovation. The urgency to deliver not just good, but exceptional work pushed Roman engineers to the cutting edge of ancient technology. It was in this crucible of pressure and expectation that true genius was forged. Take the Pantheon, for instance. Its dome, still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome, was a marvel of architectural audacity. Imagine the pressure on Apollodorus of Damascus, the brains behind Trajan's Forum, to not only meet but exceed the lofty expectations of the time. So, what legacy did these engineers leave behind? Beyond the stones and mortar, they laid the groundwork, literally and metaphorically, for modern engineering. Their techniques, like the use of arches and vaults, became the foundation for everything from medieval cathedrals to today's skyscrapers. They understood the importance of infrastructure in binding an empire together, a lesson that resonates as strongly today as it did 2 millennia ago. And let's not forget the human element. The Roman engineer wasn't just a builder. They were a leader, a visionary, and sometimes a scapegoat. In the grand theater of Roman politics, they played a part as vital as any senator or soldier. They turned ambition into reality, dreams into stone. And while the emperors might have worn the laurel wreaths, it was the engineers who laid the roads beneath their feet. As we marvel at their legacy, let's remember that these feats were built on more than just technical skill. They were built on resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to face the impossible with nothing but a groma and a whole lot of nerve. Their story isn't just one of bricks and mortar. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of human innovation. So, while we reflect on their achievements, let's keep the momentum going. Because if there's one thing Roman engineers taught us, it's that we should never stop building. never stopped dreaming. The next chapter in this saga is just waiting to be written, and I have a feeling it's going to be as thrilling as the last. Stay tuned, because the empire may have fallen, but the spirit of Roman engineering is still very much alive. And so, we arrive at the grand finale of our Roman engineering saga, complete with all the romance and reality it deserves. Let's peel back the layers of myth and take a good, hard look at what it really meant to be a Roman engineer. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all laurels and marble statues. Imagine strapping on your sandals every morning, ready to confront a world of harsh realities, with nothing more than a plumb line and a lot of pluck. That's the romanticized version, of course, the noble engineer against the wilds of nature. But the gritty truth, well, that lies somewhere between genius and sheer desperation. We'll start with the genius part. Roman engineers were the original jack-of-all-trades. They had to be. You couldn't just specialize in road building and ignore the intricacies of aqueducts or the finer points of bridge construction. One day you might be ensuring the water supply for a city of 1 million souls. The next, you're strategizing the best way to move an army across a river. Talk about multitasking. And let's not forget the innovation. Remember our friend concrete. It was used to construct the Pantheon, which boasts that giant unreinforced dome still standing today. That's over 800 years of defying gravity and the occasional earthquake. It's a testament to engineering foresight that still has modern architects scratching their heads in admiration. But before you start imagining these engineers as ancient Steve Jobs types, remember that necessity was the mother of this invention, not some idyllic pursuit of excellence. Rome needed infrastructure to sustain its sprawling empire, and the engineers delivered because they had no choice. Now, the other side of the coin, desperation. Roman engineers often towed the line between brilliant problem-solving and outright corner-cutting. The Roman road network, over 50,000 miles of it by the time the empire hit its peak, wasn't just a marvel of engineering, but a necessity for empire maintenance. Yet, constructing these roads meant dealing with everything from treacherous marshlands to stubborn mountain ranges. Solutions like the Via Appia, Rome's first major road, were impressive, but also a testament to the back-breaking labor and logistical nightmares involved. And when resources were tight, well, let's just say that sometimes the quality of the road varied more than a politician's promises. Let's talk about bridges, those charming stone arcs we still swoon over today. Bridges like the Pont du Gard and Alcantara Bridge are hailed as masterpieces, but they didn't just pop into existence because some engineer had a eureka moment. No, they were born from a mix of imperial ambition and a touch of desperation to connect far-flung corners of the empire. The Alcantara Bridge, for instance, spans the Tagus River in Spain and has been standing firm since 106 CE. It's a monument to Roman engineering prowess, sure, but also a reminder of the relentless push to keep the empire glued together. The stakes weren't just roads and bridges. They were lifelines for military movements, trade, and communication. This brings us to the myth-busting portion of our program, the romantic image of the lone genius engineer, more fiction than fact. Roman engineering was a team effort, a collective genius masked under the names of a few who managed to stand out. Sure, there were rock stars like Vitruvius, whose treatise on architecture became a cornerstone of Renaissance thought. But for every Vitruvius, there were hundreds of unsung heroes, toiling away in obscurity, their contributions lost to history. The reality was that engineering success depended on collaboration, a veritable symphony of skills and labor. It was a team sport, and sometimes the team was as ragtag as a band of misfit toys. Now, let's move to the long-term impacts of these engineering feats. The roads, the aqueducts, the monumental buildings, they weren't just the pride of Rome. They were the infrastructure that held an empire together, allowing it to thrive for centuries. And many of these structures are still around today, proving that Roman engineering wasn't just a flash in the pan. Consider the aqueducts. The Aqua Virgo, completed in 19 BCE, still supplies water to Rome's fountains. That's a 2-millennia-old plumbing system that puts some modern city planning to shame. Or how about the Via Flaminia, a road constructed in 220 BCE, which is still in use? These aren't just remnants of the past. They're active participants in today's world, bridging the gap between ancient Rome and modern life. Yet, the true legacy of Roman engineering is more than just stone and mortar. It's a testament to the power of human ingenuity under pressure. The Romans didn't have the luxury of failure. They needed to get it right, and that urgency drove them to create structures and systems that have stood the test of time. They understood that infrastructure was the backbone of civilization, a lesson that echoes through the centuries. So, were Roman engineers geniuses or desperate problem solvers? Perhaps they were a little of both. Like all great innovators, they were driven by necessity, yet they managed to transcend it, creating a legacy that is both romantic and real. They remind us that the line between survival and genius is often blurred, and that true innovation often arises from the most challenging circumstances. In the end, the story of Roman engineering is a story of resilience, creativity, and sheer determination. It's a tale of how human beings, faced with formidable challenges, can rise to the occasion and leave a mark that endures long after the empire that birthed it has faded into history. So the next time you cross a bridge or take a sip of water from a faucet, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those ancient engineers. They might not have had the technology we have today, but they had something equally valuable: the audacity to build a world that would stand the test of time. And there you have it, the grand conclusion to our journey through the world of Roman engineering. It's been a wild ride, full of triumphs and trials, myths and realities. But most importantly, it's a story that continues to inspire, reminding us of the enduring power of human innovation. Until next time, keep your plumb lines handy and your gromers ready, because you never know when you'll need to engineer your own piece of history.